always thought about what can we do for the state of California or for the country, for the United States.
We come here to figure out how to solve some of the world's toughest issues.
The mission of the Institute is to advance post-partisanship, where leaders put people over political parties and political ideology.
Well, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I really appreciate all the sponsors of today's event, the R20, the USC Schwarzenegger Institute, and of course the Air Resources Board for sponsoring today's symposium. I've taken a look at the agenda that you have here today, and it really is going to be a, shall I say, a fantastic event. And I know that it will be enlightening for everybody. Now, frankly, when I took a look at the name of the symposium, Global Climate Negotiations Lessons from California, I thought that some people might think that that is a bit presumptuous to talk about lessons that California may have for the world. But as you think about it, and as we look at California's history, we have a decade-long history of leading the world in environmental programs. And so today, as I stand before you, I can look at the fact that we're going to meet our 33% renewable energy goals by the year 2020. I can say that we are on the cusp of, if we have not hit already, 100,000 electric vehicles on the roadways here in California. We can talk about our energy efficiency standards, which have led the country for about 40 years. And I can talk about the fact that we have a climate and cap and trade program that is the model for the rest of the world. Now, we couldn't have done any of these things and had the successes that we have today without leadership. And we have been very, very fortunate in California to have consistent leadership through the years that have given us direction on how to deal with climate issues and environmental issues. Starting with the Governor Schwarzenegger and the legislature and the adoption of AB 32, we really embarked on a bold course to deal with climate changes and the problem of climate change here in the world. Governor Brown has obviously been very, very proud to continue that legacy and has continued to work and commit himself to climate change programs. But as I said, we couldn't have done it without bold leadership from the governors, from the legislature. It's important to remember that AB 32 was passed with support from Republicans and Democrats. It's important for us to maintain that consistency, and we've been able to do that as a state over the last 2 decades. Which brings me to a point that I want to make about the fact that we've also had leadership at the gubernatorial level, but also in the legislature as well. And so it's only fitting, as we're sitting here in Senator Byron Scheer's room, to acknowledge the senator and his presence here today. I recall being a young staffer at the Office of Planning and Research and being privileged to come to the legislature and watch the legislature, and it was always a pleasure to see Senator Scheer. We will also have other notable members of the legislature here today. I understand that the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Kevin De Leon, will be here later today. We will also have the pleasure of the presence of the former Speaker of the Assembly, Speaker Perez. We will also have another former Speaker, Fabian Nunez, who will be in attendance today. In addition, we have my friend and colleague, former member of the Assembly, and now the Secretary for Natural Resources, John Laird, here today. I believe I saw Assemblymember Pedro Nava in the audience at one point. And also, I've seen Mayor Bob Foster from Long Beach in attendance today. So it's it's with the presence of leaders like this that we can make a difference, that we can have climate programs that are successful. And frankly, none of our programs would be as successful without an additional leader. And so it's my privilege to introduce to you somebody who has been at the foundation of California's environmental programs for the last, well, I won't say how many years, let's just say for decades. This person has been leading California and California's environmental programs. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Mary Nichols.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thanks to all of you who are here and to all of you who are tuning in on the webcast today as well. This is a historic occasion, coming together of people from many different sectors of California's life and our very vibrant economy and political economy, and an opportunity to hear from not one but two governors at one time in one day. That doesn't happen very often. It's my great pleasure this morning to begin by introducing the person who signed AB 32, and that, of course, is Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold is a leader who let the science and the reality of climate change convince him that something needed to be done. He was willing to ignore or overcome arguments that came from his own party about the politics of the issue. He always said, and I'm not going to try to quote, but sometimes a little bit of that accent does sort of creep in, when people elected me, they didn't see air as Republican or Democrat air, they just wanted clean air. He is one of those very rare politicians, and we've been blessed, fortunately, in recent years in this regard, who didn't shy away or try to find ways to duck big and important issues, but instead greeted with, I think I can say, absolutely positive joy, the opportunity to engage in one of the great issues of our time, which of course is climate change. He reminds me of the fact that California has frequently been blessed with leaders who match the size and the importance and the beauty of our state. I don't know how many of you have seen the etching in stone. It's over Royce Hall at UCLA. It's over some of our big state buildings. It's a sentiment that was perhaps fashionable in the 1890s and not so much right now, from the poem by Sam Walter Foss, "Bring me men to match my mountains, bring me men to match my plains, men with empires in their purpose and new eras in their brains." Well, California has those kinds of leaders from time to time, and we had one at the time that we were formulating some of the important programs that you're going to be hearing about this morning. So please join me in welcoming to the stage the 38th Governor of the state of California, the chairman of the USC Schwarzenegger Institute, and my former boss, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And thank you very much, Mary, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you so much for the extraordinary work that you do for the state of California and for the world. I'm so happy and so proud that our administration hired you and that you were willing to work for Republicans and Democrats, which was terrific. California is lucky to have your tremendous leadership as the chair of the Air Resources Board. Let's give her a big hand again for the great work that she's doing. I also want to say thank you to California Secretary of the Environmental Protection, Matt Rodriguez, for hosting us here today in this beautiful green building. I can't think of any other place to hold this event than right here, so thank you very much. Big hand to you. Also, I want to say thank you very much to my friends Bonnie Rees, the Global Director of the USC Schwarzenegger Institute, and Terry Tamminen, who is representing the R20 here today, the Regions of Climate Action. Both of them have been my advisors for many, many years, and they're very passionate about the environmental issues. So thank you very much. Let's give them a big hand. We are also very lucky that we have 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners with us here today. Thank you very much to Dr. Kamen and to Dr. Pachauri for being here today. Both of them are from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they both have been big supporters of everything that we have done here in this state. And Dr. Pachauri came all the way over from India to join us here. Think about it, this is like a 16-hour flight, right? He comes all the way over from India to join us here for this conference. So I promise you, Dr. Pachauri, or Bachi, I call him, for being at your conference in India beginning of next year. Let's give them both a big, big hand. And I see my friend Ed Begley, Jr. over there. I know him, of course, since we've done the movie Stay Hungry together in 1975, almost 40 years ago. And we still look young, huh? Don't we? But I mean, it's the interesting thing was that then already, 40 years ago, he was so passionate about the environment. So he has not only been over these years a great entertainer, but a great spokesperson for the environment. So thank you very much for being here and being such a great contribution. Thank you. I also want to say thank you to Chuck Knott, who is the Dean of the Price School of Public Policy, who has helped us coordinate a lot of these things here today. He has been a great, great believer and a great partner, so let's give him also a big, big hand. And finally, I want to say thank you to Governor Jerry Brown. California owes much of its environmental vision to his leadership. And the great thing will be, as you've heard, that he will be with us later on the day. And this is a very important message, I think, to the rest of the country. Because while the politicians in Washington can't get anything done because of their being stuck in those ideological foxholes, we here in California have 2 governors from 2 different parties in the same room fighting for the same green energy future. Isn't that fantastic? Our state is truly exceptional. It is no accident that we are leading in green technology and in energy efficiency. I mean, if you think about it, that California is 40% more energy efficient than the rest of the country. I mean, if the rest of the country would have our policies and would be as energy efficient, we could literally close 2/3 of our coal-fired power plants. Or as Terry Tamminen always says, an equivalent of taking 188 million cars off the road. So think about that. So this is why I'm so proud of what we have done here in California. As leaders from all over the world prepare for the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Lima and in Paris, we are here to lead by example, as California has always done. From Governor Reagan, who established the Air Resources Board, to Governor Brown's vision of renewable energy during his first 2 terms, California has marched relentlessly towards a green and clean energy future. Californians have never seen the environment as a political issue. We recognize that there aren't conservative roads or liberal roads. We all drive on the same roads. As much as there is no conservative air or liberal air, we all breathe the same air. There is no conservative or liberal water, we all drink the same water. Now, don't get me wrong, we have plenty of partisan battles here in California, and I think that Governor Brown and I could talk to you about this for days. But we never believed in putting our environment into an ideological corner. California is lucky to have such beautiful resources, from our towering sequoias to our vast, beautiful deserts to our pristine coastline. But we are even luckier that the California people demand that we're protecting these wonderful resources. When I became governor, I wanted to continue to build on the work of my predecessors. I was proud to stand on the shoulders of such giants and to continue on the path of the pioneers who came before me. We kept up the tradition. I couldn't wait to get into this governor's office and to do some great work for the environment. This is why we passed the low-carbon fuel standard, the Green Building Initiative, the million solar roofs, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, the tailpipe emission reductions, and of course AB 32, where we made a commitment to reducing our greenhouse gases by 25% by the year 2020 and 85% by the year 2050. And we created the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, the biggest conservancy in the history of California, with 25 million acres of protected land. California has consistently moved forward to put our money where our mouth is. We never waited for the federal government or any kind of an international agreement or anything else. In California, we don't believe in waiting. We believe in being in a perpetual state of motion. When California passed these laws, there were, of course, some experts that thought that we were absolutely insane, that we were crazy. They said it was Washington's job. The state had no business in doing any of that. We said, the hell with that. We don't wait for anyone. Some even so-called experts said that the economy will be crashing down and will go down the drain. Well, the opposite actually has happened. We attract more than half of all of the green tech venture capital in the United States. Think about that. Our green tech companies have raised 5 times as much capital as the second-place state. But it isn't just the green sector. Our economy as a whole has been thriving. In fact, we lead the nation in manufacturing, in green tech, in biotech, in high tech, in agriculture, entertainment, tourism, and the list goes on and on and on. And we have been implementing our environmental standards just like we have planned it, and California's economy has outpaced national growth. Isn't that unbelievable? We have outpaced national growth. In 2012, the United States GDP grew by 2.8%, but California's economy grew by 3.5%. So what happened when they said the economy will be crashing down when we go green, when we protect the environment? Well, they were wrong, we were right. You see, in California, we don't have to choose between the environment and the economy. We know the opposite is true. Protecting the environment builds a strong, sustainable economy for the future. We also know that doing nothing will cost us a fortune down the line. From hundreds of billions of dollars to repair infrastructure that will be in danger of flooding, to tens of thousands of heat-related and pollution-related death, to the never-ending fire season. The threat of ignoring climate change are immense and real. As a matter of fact, there's a UN study that just came out that says, and predicted that further warming will slow down economic growth, increase poverty, and further erode food security around the world. And therefore, California refuses to tolerate inaction. This is why we declared war on pollution, and this is why we declared war on climate change. And today, because of that, as I said, we are 40% more energy efficient, and we are the leaders. Now, was it easy? Oh, no. You all know that. I mean, in every step of the way, people have fought us. But we always fight back. And of course, the critics use very effective scare tactics. Remember when the catalytic converter was required? People screamed immediately, this will be the death of Detroit. This will be the end of the auto industry. And when we implemented Fran Parfley's tailpipe emission standards, it was déjà vu. They said that we would never be able to do business here again. The car companies declared war on California. They, all of them, sued us. And the federal government fought us too. They refused to give us even a waiver to clean up our own air. They said that greenhouse gases are not a pollutant. Imagine. So we were forced to take the federal government to court. And we took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court finally decided that yes, greenhouse gases are a pollutant. Well, duh. I mean, even though they tried to do everything they could to put a roadblock there for us and to stop us, but the opposite has happened. 14 other states have passed similar tailpipe emission standards as California. We had a lot of people joining us. And in 2009 was the ultimate victory during the Obama administration. They made our tailpipe emission law a federal standard. But the battles continued. When we passed AB 32, the oil companies and the coal companies came in, storming in from outside the state. And they spent millions and millions of dollars to try to pass Proposition 23, to undo everything that we have done with AB 32. And of course, they said to the people right away that our economy will be crashing down and businesses will close their doors and people will lose their jobs and all of this scare tactics. But we didn't pull back, we didn't give in. We put together a great team of Democrats and Republicans, and we raised $31 million. And on the day of election, the people of California have terminated Proposition 23. And we said, hasta la vista, baby, to those oil and coal companies and send them back with their fossil fuels where they belong. Our success has shown to the world that subnational governments have tremendous power. And I'm talking about the cities, the states, the provinces. We have tremendous power that we can lead the way in the fight against climate change. Now, of course, I hope there's an international agreement. I hope there's a Kyoto 2, because as you know, I like sequels. But it's not going to be easy. But in the meantime, I can tell you one thing, that if anyone can bring together all those countries, it is UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who is a great leader and is very passionate about the environment. But subnational governments around the world should not wait for Lima or Paris. We should be defined by our movement, not by our hesitation. There's no better place to spread this message, of course, is right here in California, the home of Apple that taught us to think different, of FaceTime that taught us to move fast and to break things. So, we're here today because California has never waited, we have never hesitated, and we have never taken no for an answer. So today, I promise you that I will continue fighting that battle, that crusade. And I invite the rest of the world to join us here in California on our march towards a sustainable energy future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage actor and environmentalist Ed Begley Jr.
Thank you, Arnold, for that great speech and the substance behind it that made so many wonderful changes here in California and across the country, across the world. I'm going to talk about the media's role in this climate change crisis that we face in a moment. But first, let me talk about Arnold. And this actually is appropriate because we met in the media. We met doing a movie, as he was so kind to suggest. But first of all, in 1975, he took me the first time with Franco Colombo, who's here somewhere. He'd been there many times. Franco, of course, he lived at Gold's Gym, as did Arnold. But he took me to Gold's Gym. He helped me to get my personal environment in shape. So I'm still at 65. I'm still working for the environment because you got me in shape, Arnold, in 1975. So thank you. He taught me the value of eating healthy and exercising, what have you. It's something I enjoy to this day. But we also talked, you may not remember this, but because this was in Santa Monica, Gold's Gym there, in Venice perhaps, and talked about the beautiful beaches that were there and keeping them clean, and the ocean water, which was very polluted back then, and about cleaning it up, and the air, about cleaning up the air. We have 4 times the cars since 1975, millions more people, and yet the air is much cleaner, and that Santa Monica Bay has been cleaned up to a large extent. And as Arnold suggested, they say we go broke doing it, but there were jobs. Think about it. There are jobs making catalytic converters and combined cycle gas turbines and spray paint booths and all those things that cleaned up the air. And I would certainly concede that there are jobs in oil refineries and in oil derricks and things like that and in coal mines, but aren't there also jobs making those double pane windows and energy efficient thermostats and electric cars and solar panels and wind turbines? Are those not jobs too? Of course they are. Well, what is the role of the media in this? This is my charge today to talk about that. I can't say it any better than what Bonnie Rees said to me back in 1988 when we met. We started this thing called ECHO, Earth Communications Office, and many people are here from ECHO, of course. And so, we talked about the role of media in getting these things accomplished. And I said, why do you think it's so important, Bonnie? And she said, because there's not time to go door to door. We need to use the electronic media, the print media, now the internet, and do those things that we can to get the word out. Not to denigrate the people who do go door to door. I know many of them. I've done it myself. That's important too. Grassroots is very important. But also, you need more than one tool in your toolbox. And Terry Tamminen knows this, who's accomplished so many great things in this realm. And Bonnie knows this, to get that word out. And people also say, hey, you're just an actor. Why don't you just shut up and do your job and not say anything about it? Arnold would never do that. He never shut up. He not only did his job in show business, but he did his job to get climate change rules passed and do other wonderful things for the environment. And to say we should just shut up, you can't tell any citizen to just be quiet and pipe down. You can't say that to any citizen. But if you're a performer and you have the microphone, you have the world megaphone, the microphone, you're on stage in front of the world camera, you're about to go on. and Dr. Kamen or Dr. Pashari taps you on the shoulder, they're the fire marshal. You're about to perform and do a song and dance. And the fire marshal comes up to you, which is in the form of these wonderful Nobel laureates, and say, we have a problem. There's a fire in the basement. We have to evacuate this theater. Thanks so much for telling me that. Thank you so much. And do a song and dance, and thank you so much. I don't want any controversy. I don't want to talk about the fire in the basement. How could you do that? You can't do that. You can't keep that information to yourself that you learned from Dr. Kamen and Dr. Pashari. And that's what we have the charge to do with media. And there's many wonderful ways to do that in the media, to get the information out, to, with films and ads and op-ed pieces. But one of the most effective things for me is humor. And there's a great John Oliver piece you're going to see right now where he does this wonderfully. Watch, please. Thank you so much.
The Earth. You may know it as that blue thing Bruce Willis is always trying to save. Or from its famous collaboration with wind and fire. Or just simply as that place where George Clooney lives. Anyway, the Earth had some genuinely bad news this week.
A White House report that says global warming threatens every part of the U.S.
This isn't something in the distant future. Climate change is already affecting us now.
Now. Smart move, Obama. That is a key shift in how to talk about climate change, because we've all proven that we cannot be trusted with the future tense. We've been repeatedly asked, don't you want to leave a better Earth for your grandchildren? And we've all collectively responded, f*** them. But, incredibly, this latest damning scientific report may still face an uphill climb with some of us.
There's that Gallup poll that came out last month, which found 1 in 4 Americans is skeptical of all the effects of climate change and thinks this issue's been exaggerated.
Who gives That doesn't matter. You don't need people's opinions on a fact. You might as well have a poll asking which number is bigger, 15 or 5. Or do owls exist? Or are there hats? The debate on climate change should not be whether or not it exists, it's what we should do about it. There is a mountain of research on this topic. Global temperatures are rising, heat waves are becoming more common, sea surface temperatures are also rising, glaciers are melting, and of course no climate report is complete without the obligatory photo of a polar bear balancing on a piece of ice. The only accurate way to report that 1 out of 4 Americans are sceptical of global warming is to say, a poll finds that 1 out of 4 Americans are wrong about something. Because a survey of thousands of scientific papers that took a position on climate change found that 97% endorsed the position that humans are causing global warming. And I think I know why people still think this issue is open to debate, because on TV, it is. And it's always 1 person for, 1 person against. And it's usually the same person for.
Bill Nye and Marsha Blackburn, welcome both of you to Meet the Press.
Bill Nye joins us now, along with climate change skeptic Mark Morano.
Joining me now to go head-to-head, Bill Nye, science educator and CEO of the Planetary Society.
In the crossfire, Bill Nye, the science guy.
Bill Nye, the science guy who believes in man-made global warming.
Yeah, that's right. More often than not, it's Bill Nye, the science guy, versus some dude. And when you look at the screen, it's 50-50, which is inherently misleading. If there has to be a debate about the reality of climate change, and there doesn't, then there is only one mathematically fair way to do it.
Last Week Tonight presents a statistically representative climate change debate.
Good evening. Joining me tonight, a climate change denier and, naturally, Bill Nye science guy.
Bill? John?
Yep.
Humans are causing climate change? No question.
Wait. Before we begin, in the interest of mathematical balance, I'm going to bring out 2 people who agree with you, climate skeptic, and Bill Nye, I'm also going to bring out 96 other scientists. It's a little unwieldy, but this is the only way you can actually have a representative discussion. So, yeah, please file in. Again, this is going to make the debate difficult. We shouldn't really be having it in the first place. But, so, representationally, climate skeptic, please make a case against climate change.
Well, I just don't think all the science is in yet. It's settled.
OK, and what is the overwhelming view of the entire scientific community?
Well, OK.
Ladies and gentlemen, representing 97% of all scientists, please welcome the co-recipient of the 2007 Nobel Prize, UC Berkeley professor Dr. Dan Kamen.
So John Oliver certainly got it right, but without people like Rajendra Pachauri, Governor Schwarzenegger, Mary Nichols, we couldn't make the transition from knowing there's a problem to knowing there's a solution to the problem, and that's really what I want to focus my comments on for you today. When we talk about what we've learned about the climate story, from sea level rise to fires to droughts to impacts on biodiversity, on species, it is a daunting story of problems. And in fact, the title that I was accurately given for these comments is, How Dangerous is the Situation? How Vulnerable Are We? And in fact, there's been a series of reports that have begun to swing the needle back to exactly what Governor Schwarzenegger said in 2006, and that is the scientific consensus is in, but the action sequel, climate change making a difference, still needs to be written and to be filmed, and that's what we're all doing today. And so when we look at the reports that have come down the line, from the business as usual path that we were on, to the World Bank, where I worked for a year, saying 4 degrees is unacceptable, to what we know scientifically, half of that is unacceptable, we move to a process where we're not only seeing climate change disasters looming in front of us, but we're now seeing them today. This is a picture from Science magazine highlighting 570 vents on the seafloor off the east coast of the United States, where we're seeing methane bubbling out of the ground because the temperature pressure difference is changing as we warm the water. These are not stories that are going to come up in a future action movie. These are things we have to terminate today. So we have right now ample evidence that climate change is affecting us now. We have report after report, as John Oliver highlighted, in terms of how grim the situation is when one climate denier can hold sway in a quote-unquote one-on-one debate. The science community has an obligation to make much clearer not only that we are facing a series of issues, and Peter Glick will highlight some of the issues around sea level rise, another critical issue because so much of our US and California and global infrastructure are on the coasts. But we have to highlight where this story has a transition into a series of positive, job-creating, environmental justice promoting steps to invest in those areas where we know we can make a difference. And in fact, when you take that perspective, and I'll use my comments today to highlight that, the story doesn't look anywhere near as hard or as dire. It takes commitment and coordination, and that's exactly what you've seen in all the comments. In fact, if you look in your brochure, you will see California hasn't just passed AB 32, this landmark law on climate change, but a whole series of supporting legislations. We have a standard for clean energy, our RPS. We have a carbon market. We have SB 375 that requires us to look at vehicle miles traveled as a function of planning decisions. All of these pieces demonstrate you can put the story together. And so when I look at all of these very worrisome and very accurate scientific studies, and by the way, that report that came out on the 97%, I'm very pleased to say that was in a journal for which I'm the editor-in-chief, Environmental Research Letters, a place where we get sued regularly by those climate deniers for highlighting the message. When you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, these IPCC documents, the latest one, AR5, has just come out, what you see is the path we're on, that red path, that's the business as unusual, the business as we cannot accept path. Making the blue path reality, that's what California's been about, that's what Portugal, Germany, Denmark, Korea, the climate leaders are all about making happen. And the most important message, in my opinion, for you all to take away today is that we have a growing stable of job-creating, low-cost opportunities to green our economy. We will always have these battles to be fought, as Governor Schwarzenegger highlighted, but these are all things we have to fight as retrograde battles, defending solid, economically performing opportunities to move forward. So when I look at the picture of where we're going, one of the features that my laboratory has been engaged in is to build a series of models of energy systems around the country. We started off, of course, building a model of California's energy economy. We then built it for all the western states, Western Canada and Mexico that are tied together in a power pool. We've recently released versions of this model called Switch for China, for Chile. We'll be introducing one for India in a bit. And across all of these very different market structures, places where different fuels are subsidized or not, the message comes off in a very, very clear way. And that is, there's a whole wide range of scenarios, all of which get us to this 2 degrees C, this less risky, not entirely risk-free, but this less risky 2 degrees C pathway. In each of these different parts of the world, there are a wide range of economic opportunities to make this path happen. And so I'll highlight just a series of these different scenarios, one where natural gas prices raise, one where we meet the federal goal of having solar cost $1 a watt, a target that we're on the path of. Another one where the price of nuclear and the adoption of nuclear is high. Another one where there is no nuclear. All of these are different scenarios, all of which make that target, and in fact, consistently, the price of power barely rises any differently from that we'd expect just based on inflation. And I want to highlight that part of the story. As we look ahead, in each of these parts of the world, we have systems that are dominated largely by oil, by gas and coal today. But as we move from 2020 to 2030 to 2050, in each of these cases, we find that there are viable paths, and what they all require is a very simple equation. And that is, if you coordinate what your government agencies do, and you send a clear message to the private sector saying, we are on a path to decrease our emissions down to that 80% below the 1990 level by 2050. In all of these cases, there are workable scenarios where the price of power is barely different than it would have been without these policies, plus you get a whole host of benefits. More jobs created by investing in this clean energy systems, dramatically improved urban air quality that affects all people and directly addresses one of the big issues in this field, and that is environmental justice has to be a central part of the story. The most important message in AR4, the fourth assessment, was that global warming will most strongly and most quickly affect the global poor. It didn't say the poorest countries. It said anywhere from inner city Oakland to inner city Mumbai. Those are the people who will most directly be affected. The people living most on the margins are most left out of this equation. So if you don't adopt a clean energy strategy for your home, city, country, region, you are committing a clear piece of environmental injustice. And it's one that will come back to cost us and already cost us in many ways. So when I look at this sort of snapshot of images, the one scenario that stands out as more expensive than all the others is if we fail to continue to do what California's done since 1970s, and that is to continue to be a leader in energy efficiency. High cost of solar or wind or low cost of this, that, all those scenarios work, but if we don't keep energy efficiency at the center of our agenda, we make our life difficult and we make our choices more expensive. And that's why California's commitment to making efficiency job one, clean energy right on its heels, that's a strategy that wins this overall picture. And that's the piece that we have to keep central to the conversation. We just released a version of this model for China. A feature of the story is that we see China going from a coal-dominated world today to solar and storage-dominated if we can keep innovating as fast as we've been going in terms of making solar technologies less expensive, generating more and more energy efficiency options, more and more ways to store that energy. That's a transformative picture. My last comments, however, are that we have left out, largely in the country and to some extent in California, making the clean energy proposition one that works for individuals. One thing we were asked to do by Governor Schwarzenegger's administration was to build a carbon calculator so individuals could look at what is their footprint, what are the opportunities to save. So when we look at this across the country, we see the map, green is good and red is bad in this picture, as you'd expect. We see carbon dioxide emissions by zip code, but now we can zoom in. Big data really does buy us some benefits. When we look at carbon dioxide emissions for each zip code, by kilowatt hours used, by natural gas, by oil. We see these patterns that reveal different policies and how critical they are to making or not making a climate difference. Then if we look at our transportation footprint, we look at our footprint for goods, services, food. All of this is, of course, on the website for the conference. All of these things highlight the degree to which we have opportunities. When we look at our cities, many cities have brilliant climate plans. Plan NYC, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Frequently, they are planned for the urban core. They leave out the periphery, they leave out the suburbs. That's cheating. Climate doesn't care if you win in the city but lose in the suburbs. We absolutely have to have plans that look at these pimples as they are. A green core surrounded by a red, long commuting suburb is not a solution to this picture. So when we look at opportunities for companies to re-onshore funding they have available in stranded overseas funds they could be putting into clean energy, when we look at the opportunities to invest in clean tech emerging in Kenya, in Mozambique, in Mexico, in Brazil, these are places where our companies can make a huge difference driven by a good policy. Overall, what we find is that there are opportunities across the board to invest in these clean energy opportunities, to do so at prices for energy that are barely different than we expect today, but with huge co-benefits in terms of health, welfare, less time commuting. All of these are opportunities, and we also have to begin at home. We have opportunities everywhere from where I work at the UC system to invest in clean energy, but also to adopt carbon pricing and to move ourselves so that we can join the chorus of divesting from fossil fuels, to finding the opportunities to making these types of investments the place where every company wants to go. And the kind of leadership we've seen in California is exactly what enables that equation. So thank you all for being here, and I hope that we choose not only to listen today, but also to adopt many of these strategies that make this green revolution work. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dean of the USC Price School of Public Policy, Jack Knott.
Well, on behalf of USC and the Saul Price School of Public Policy, it's really a privilege to be here today and be a part of this important symposium. There are many reasons why I'm very grateful to have the Schwarzenegger Institute for State and Global Policy housed at USC and at the Price School of Public Policy. At the top of the list is the opportunity to participate with the governor and the many remarkable leaders that he works with to really make a difference on the most important policy issues of the day. On a personal note, I have come to consider Arnold a friend. And I've also come to know and greatly appreciate the kind of passion and incredible knowledge he has about public policy. I have worked with him at USC in Los Angeles for 2 years now, and I've had the opportunity to travel with him to South Korea and to Washington, D.C. Our trip to Washington last year was both successful and fun. We were there to protect $1.5 billion that were being used to support after-school programs in every state. And we met with a bipartisan group of U.S. senators hosted by the majority leader and a bipartisan group of congressmen and congresswomen hosted by the majority whip, Kevin McCarthy. And while we were in Washington, Arnold spoke passionately from personal experience about the value of after-school programs to millions of children and of the importance to their educational success. I was armed with the academic research and data to back this up, kind of an academic version of twins. We ended up not only protecting the funding, but having the allocation increased. And I see now why Arnold is indeed an action hero, although in a little different context. Arnold shares the USC Price School's philosophy that public policy is best informed when guided by facts and research. We both share the view that academic research should focus on how it can actually make an influence on real-world problems. So it is very fitting that this symposium includes important academic research that looks at the economic cost of climate change. As policymakers debate the laws that are best to achieve the goals that seek we seek in reducing greenhouse gases while also protecting jobs in the economy, they need all of the facts. When decision makers often hear arguments claiming climate change is too costly, it is important to have research that also looks at what not addressing climate change would cost. So we're going to have a conversation about this, and it will be moderated by Dr. Dan Mazmanian from the USC Price School. He's a respected expert on environmental policy and was recently appointed as the academic director of the Schwarzenegger Institute. Joining the conversation is Dr. Anthony Westerling from the University of California, Merced, and Dr. Peter Glick, president of the Pacific Institute. We trust that you will find this conversation informative and enlightening. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Dan Mazmanian, and I would like to begin our discussion with a comment about policy and about three kinds of problems that we face in the policy world. I think we're all aware of, but I want to underscore them. There are those problems we face where we know the problem and we have a pretty good idea about how to solve it. There are those we know but don't have a good handle on how to deal with or if solving them is even possible. And then there are those we don't know. The point of this panel is to underscore that we have a reasonable amount of knowledge about the implications of climate change effects on California with respect to, among many issues, sea level rise and forest fires. And although our knowledge is far from perfect in these areas, there are important steps that can and should be taken now in order to avoid potentially very serious economic and other costs of inaction if we fail to do so. With this in mind, I'm going to first welcome to the podium Peter Glick, who is eminently qualified to share with us what is known about sea level rise. Peter.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'll try not to make any movie jokes, but I have to say I've become an awful great fan of Governor Schwarzenegger, and now you know why, for those of you who heard him this morning. I'm the director of the Pacific Institute, which is a nonprofit research institute in Oakland. Many of you may know the work that we do on freshwater resources. We're doing extensive work now on the drought. We've worked for many years on the issue of climate change, on the risks to California, California's water system, California's coastal systems from climate change. Just a quick comment on the drought. The drought is a climate issue as well. Not only have the last few years been extraordinarily dry, this year may be the hottest year on record for California. So these are connected issues. This is not just a sea level rise issue. It's not just a forest fire issue. This issue of climate change is going to affect everything that we care about. I am going to talk about sea level rise. We did the first assessment at the Institute in 1990 of the risks to the Bay Area from sea level rise. We did a subsequent follow-up a couple of years ago for the state of California, for the entire coast from Oregon down to Mexico, looking at the risks to California of expected and ongoing sea level rise. And my message is fairly simple. Sea level rise changes the fundamental characteristics of the California coast at very great economic cost to us. What we have not measured or cannot measure actually outweighs the kinds of economic costs that we have already measured. So we know to some degree that the costs to the California economy and the public are extraordinarily large from sea level rise, but we also know that we don't know everything, and that many of the costs to us are still not calculated, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And we also know that because of these risks that are ongoing, not a future risk, but a now risk, as John Oliver noted, we have to begin adaptation planning, and we have to begin responses immediately. We have unavoidable changes occurring. No matter what we do on the emissions side, we have to deal with adaptation challenges as well. So quickly, we looked at a whole range of impacts for the coast. And one of the things we quantified was the value of current property at risk from expected sea level rise. The buildings, the contents of those buildings. That assessment alone, which I will argue is the least important probable risk of sea level rise, suggests that there's $100 billion of economic value in buildings and property alone at risk of sea level rise at the 2000 level of development, ignoring the development that we may pursue over the coming decades. And that's only buildings and content. But there are many other things that we have not measured that have a value, economic, social, political, cultural value as well. And we'd better realize that what we measure is not the only part of the picture. There are 480,000 people today living in the areas at risk of sea level rise. Again, ignoring future population growth or what we may choose to do on the coasts. And the vast majority of those people are the poorest populations of the nation and the poorest populations of the state. As Dan Kamen mentioned, this is an environmental justice issue as well. Industrial infrastructure, there are 29 major wastewater treatment plants in the areas at risk. We spend a lot of money collecting wastewater. We treat it to a high standard. We typically throw it away. That's a water issue, which I won't get into. But those plants are typically at sea level, and they're not prepared, they're not built for sea level rise. We have 10,000 megawatts of power plants in the risk zone. Ecosystems. How do you value ecosystem services that might be at risk? We know those values aren't zero. We may have ignored those values in the past century, but in the 21st century, we know that ecosystem values are critical as well, if only we could put dollar figures on them. There are thousands of miles of roads and railways and transportation infrastructure. Next time you cross the Bay Bridge from the East Bay into San Francisco, look at the sea level rise of the roadway there right before the new bridge. What's the cost of rebuilding or protecting infrastructure? What's the cost of retreating from the coast? What's the cost of repeated assaults from extreme events? We're not talking about slow incremental sea level rise. That's going to be damaging enough. But one of the things we learned from Sandy was that it's the extreme events that cost us. What are the costs of repeated extreme events with an incrementally slowly rising sea over time? Ultimately, what's the cost to our economy? We don't really know, but it's going to be very significant. And I love this picture of the 747. That's the San Francisco airport taken from sea level rise. There's major infrastructure at risk here. And I should point this out. We're going to talk about sea level rise, we're going to talk about forestry, but climate change is a big issue and it's going to affect everything we care about. Agricultural production. We're a major agricultural state, and believe me, if there's any part of our economy that's fundamentally dependent on the variability of our climate, or vulnerable to the variability of our climate, it's agriculture. Water supply and delivery. We're losing snowpack. One of the fundamental challenges to the state is impacts on our water systems. Water quality, heat stress. We're going to hear about forest fires, human health, recreation, and others. We have to continue to move forward to understand these risks, to begin to adapt to them, but we can't wait for perfect knowledge to take the actions that we know we need to take. Thank you very much.
I want to next bring up Leroy Westerling. As you heard, he's Associate Professor of Environmental Engineering and Geography at UC Merced, who's a leading expert on the issue of the implications in forest fires through climate change and the implications for the entire Southwest, in particular California. Leroy.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to the audience. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have to say it's a pleasure to live in a state that takes such a leadership role on climate change and energy and sustainability. I'm just going to dive in here. So wildfire is an important route by which climate change can affect us, and wildfire today has been increasing in California and the western United States for decades as temperatures increase and the lands dry out. And there's a variety of impacts here that we can consider, from the direct losses of forest products and opportunities for recreation and species habitat, to the property losses homeowners that are located in or near our forests and grasslands and shrublands in California that are at risk from wildfire. But then there are also indirect risks. So far more people are impacted by the pollution from wildfire emissions than are directly impacted because they live where the wildfires occur or they visit the areas after they've occurred. You can see in the picture there from the 2003 fire siege in San Diego and Southern California, millions of people living in densely urbanized coastal areas were exposed to pollution for an extended period of time from those fires. And that's true from wildfire regularly in the Central Valley as well. And finally, there's dramatic impacts on our runoff, the quantity, the quality of the water, and emissions, and sediment transport, and post-fire flood and mudslide risks. And a lot of these risks are not well quantified, both what their extent is today and how they would change in the future. But we do know a lot about wildfire. So let's talk a bit about how these are going to interact. And I'm going to focus primarily on property losses and emissions from smoke, smoke emissions from wildfire. So in the next slide, I'm showing here the number of large forest fires around the western U.S. on federal lands, year by year. And the horizontal black bars are showing the decadal averages in the number of fires. Now, the area burned in those fires has increased even more. And the red is showing primarily the fires burning in California forests, most of which are federal. And so you can see that it's not the case that fire just increased suddenly, say, in the 1980s, and then it went forward at that level. It's been increasing continuously, year by year, decade by decade, for 30, 40 years now. And it's also the case that the length of the fire season is increasing, and the duration that individual fires are burning has increased as well. West-wide, the increase in the season is over 2/3. And the length of time that fires burn on average has gone from 1 week to over 5 weeks in this period that we're looking at here. So this is really fundamental change in our system. And the cost of fighting these fires per acre has stayed relatively constant over recent decades. So the costs for suppressing these fires on federal lands and state lands have increased, have kept pace with the increase in the area burned. I want to talk a bit about scenarios here. I'm going to show you 3 scenarios initially. So what is on this slide is changes in wildfire area burned under 3 different climate scenarios, so around the end of this century, looking at 3 different climate models. So what's changing across these scenarios is how sensitive the climate system is to the greenhouse gas forcing that we're putting into the atmosphere globally. So the leftmost is the coolest and wettest of the 3 projections, and the rightmost is the warmest and driest. And what I want you to take away from this is that as the state warms up and dries out, you get more and more forest fire area burned in the northern and central mountains of the state. Right? And you actually get decreases when it dries up quite a bit in sort of interior basins and things like that. So these different patterns have different consequences for what kinds of measures we want to take and what kinds of management choices are going to affect different impacts from economic impacts from climate change. And it turns out that for impacts especially, the source of uncertainty that comes from how sensitive the climate system is over time is much less significant than what is the uncertainty about what we will do in the future. And so that's why we always are using scenarios. We're always playing what-if games. We can't give you a number. We have to talk about how things are changing with respect to our actions on the ground. So in this case, most of our development is in lowland areas where it's much less sensitive to climate change and where our risks are things we're building in on the ground right now, where we're siting homes and how we're managing the vegetation around them. In this slide, now we're looking at changes in emissions from wildfire. So pollution emissions from wildfire, in particular here, it's small particulates. So the historic period on the leftmost panel, the emissions are actually dominated by Southern California. By mid-century, this is climate change we're largely committed to that we can't change. we have the central part of the state dominating emissions. And by end of century, if we didn't do anything and we still had the vegetation there to burn, the emission increase would be enormous. The most certain scenario to look at there is the mid-century. So let's zoom in on that and talk about some options here. So the upper left panel is what the historic emissions look like just in the federal areas of the Sierra Nevadas. And the redder parts there are some hot spots where we've had more emissions in the past. Now, if you go to the upper right panel there, that's what it would look like mid-century if you didn't do anything about the fuels. Okay? But we have a lot of forests where fire suppression and land use changes have led to increased fuel densities. So the lower left and lower right panels are just two of many fuels treatment scenarios that came from the Forest Service that reduced dramatically the emissions, so that in many places, even with substantial climate change, wildfire emissions stay flat or even decrease. And I should point out that these scenarios are not driven by a goal of reducing emissions. They're following other management priorities of the Forest Service in particular. So we could even do much better than this. But we would have to start today because it takes a long time to treat the portion of the landscape that we would have to treat to have this kind of change in our vulnerability. Thank you.
I want to pick up on Leroy's closing comment and field a couple of questions here to both Leroy and Peter. And the first is, can you provide us one or two notable examples of action that is being taken to address what you've identified as the existing but also looming costs of either major forest fires or sea level rise, and who would like to begin?
I can address that if you like. So we have a long-term commitment from the federal government in particular, but also at state levels, to treat fuels in forests that have been altered by fire suppression and land use changes. But those resources have to compete often with the need for money for fire suppression. So for example, the Forest Service is spending over $1 billion a year on fire suppression in the western United States right now. And so that increase that they've had in the fire suppression because of increased fires has meant that their budget has gone from a 16% allocation for fire suppression to over 42%. And everything else has stayed flat or declined at the same time. So the capacity to treat fuels has been limited and decreasing.
Peter.
So there are a couple of points to make. One is I think we're not doing enough to prepare for the impacts we know are coming. We are beginning to do things. We're beginning to look at what we call no-regret strategies, co-benefits, the idea of cutting fuel load. Whether or not climate change happens, that's something you want to do for forest protection and forest fire reduction. But there are things that we ought to be doing on top of that because of sea level rise expectations, because of climate broadly. We are beginning to change design of coastal infrastructure so that we're planning not just for today's sea level rise, but for sea level rise over the coming decades. I think that's critical. Let me give you one water example, actually. Sacramento, as many of you know who live in Sacramento, is vulnerable to flooding events on the American River. Folsom Dam is upstream. Some recent modifications to the infrastructure at Folsom have permitted them to dump water more quickly out of Folsom in the event of big storm events. But what that means is not only flood protection, but they can store more water longer in Folsom, which is a drought response as well. And given the changes of climate and snowpack in the Sierras, that kind of change to existing infrastructure provides flood benefits now, drought benefits now, and climate benefits in the future. So we need to think about these kind of co-benefits and how to capture them.
So what I hear from both of you in response is that although climate change is going to exacerbate the kinds of problems we've been experiencing, both of you commented about how to simply enhance the kinds of responses we currently have, if I understand what you're saying. So what 2 or 3 key steps might be taken now in terms of policy and the audience we're here with today that you can foresee we should be taking as a state in enhancing our capacities?
Well, I think that I touched on the 2 main ones already, and that is that we need to think about how new development, its siting, how it's constructed, how the vegetation around it is managed, builds in vulnerability to climate change via wildfires. And fires really should be like any other sort of natural process where it happens and we live with it. And we shouldn't have to spend $100 million plus in California and $1 billion in the federal government to put them out every year. That money should be going into managing the landscape.
Yeah, I agree with this issue of development. We're not very good about thinking about the way we develop. We never have been. We need to now integrate climate change risks into development along the coast, for example. The kinds of development we permit along the coast, if we don't expect sea level rise, is going to be different than the kind of development we ought to permit now that we understand that sea level rise is going up. So planning and development is one critical thing. I would argue we need to change the way we design our insurance programs in coastal protection and flood protection. Insurance programs provide incentives or disincentives for certain kinds of development. And I think we need to change the way we protect ecosystems. We know that ecosystems are enormously at risk from sea level rise. So not only do we have to think about current wetlands, but we need to think about the undeveloped lands immediately adjacent to ecosystems that are going to be threatened, that we might need to retreat to, that have ecosystem value. So we think about protecting coastal ecosystems, but we think less well, if you will, about protecting neighboring lands that might be of especially important value from an ecosystem point of view. And I think that's going to be a change in thinking also.
So you're leading to my next question, and it relates to why we're up here as a panel, and beginning with Arnold's comments about research and Jack Knott's about our responsibilities contributing to solutions and proposals. And I want to come back to what I commented at the beginning. Of the problems we know, but we know less about, which one or two are most in need of attention by the research community today?
So I think it's one thing to say that you need to treat X% of the landscape and you need to restore a healthy forest structure and density. It's another thing to actually do it on the ground. And I think that there's probably not going to be one best way to do it that works everywhere. And the reasons why things work well, we may not know until long after the fact. So we really need to take some kind of portfolio approach where we try different things on landscape in different places and hedge our bets, and then watch and see what happens afterwards and learn from it. And I think one of the things that we have to be really paying attention to are interactive effects. When you have wildfire and, say, insect outbreaks, and you're doing these management treatments on the landscape to change the fuel structure and things like that, how do those things interact with each other? We don't do that kind of research very much. And that's something where all the surprises are probably going to come from.
Yes, we always talk about doing that kind of research, but it's seldom done. Peter.
I'm a researcher. I think there are plenty of things that need to be tackled. I think there are plenty of things we don't know. We need to know a lot more, especially about extreme events. Extreme events are really where we're most vulnerable. And I think there's a lot to be learned from events like Sandy, which was an extreme event in the extreme, if you will, and taught us about our failure to make investments in advance to address coastal risks. But I would also like to, I'd probably leave us with the message that despite what we don't know, we know enough. We know enough now to be taking actions that we're not yet taking. The risks of climate change, again, aren't a future risk. They're a risk happening now. We see evidence all around us of impacts of climate change, from rising seas to rising temperatures to changing snowfall and snowmelt dynamics in the Sierras to impacts on our water systems to forest frequency. There's a lot that we ought to be doing now rather than waiting for more knowledge to convince those three percenters who still haven't quite gotten the message.
You know, there's a lot to be discussed in terms of this kind of research and what as academics and researchers we should be doing, but I want to just conclude, because we are out of time, but would underscore what Peter said here, which is among the academic community, the researchers, while we appreciate the extent of uncertainty in all these areas, there is a growing body of knowledge that we do have a consensus about, which is acting now, irrespective of the immediate costs, is going to be far less costly in not only dollars, but in the well-being of Californians in the future. And I think that's the message of this panel. So I want to thank you for being with us today. Bonnie Rees, the Global Director of the Schwarzenegger Institute, who's going to be chairing the next panel. Bonnie, please come up.
On behalf of the USC Schwarzenegger Institute, it's a privilege to be one of the organizers of today's symposium. This room is filled with leaders from across the state, from government, NGOs, academia, business, investors, and student leaders. And while we all care about many issues, education, the economy, healthcare, public safety, war and peace, immigration, and poverty, no single issue will have as huge an impact on our generation and the next as climate change. So keeping a spotlight on this issue, as we are doing today, is great, or as my friend Arnold likes to say, fantastic. Everyone here has played a role in California's status as a leader in environmental protection and climate change action. That status has regions across the US and the globe looking to us, which is why today's primary focus is lessons learned. And from those lessons learned, what we can share to help other regions move forward smartly, as well as help advance our own state's leadership. Obviously, it would take a 3-month symposium to fully address all the lessons we have learned. So today, we choose to focus on the most relevant issues in today's climate debate. Those who are trying to stop efforts to address climate change and reduce greenhouse gases in our state, in Congress, and elsewhere say, well, maybe the science proves there's climate change occurring, but we cannot afford to do anything. They say it hurts the economy and it will cost jobs. That is why we just had an academic panel focused on the economic costs of climate change. And in your program, that is why we listed other research relevant to that issue as well. As policymakers and the public hear about the possible costs of addressing climate change, it is important to highlight the research and data on the high cost of not addressing it. And now we will hear about why addressing climate change is in fact good for business. We get why those businesses making billions of dollars selling fossil fuels do not want any action to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. We get that they commit some of those billions of dollars to fund legal challenges, political fundraisers, and advertising campaigns to scare working families. So it is important that we spotlight all the other businesses and corporate leaders who do not make their bonuses and profit and loss selling fossil fuels. Today, however, we will not be including green and clean tech such as solar, wind, and renewable energy businesses. While these businesses have added over 300,000 jobs in California in the past 5 years and brought over $223 billion to California's economy and attracted more venture capital to California than anywhere else in the nation, today we do not want to focus on this sector. Instead, we focus on the American businesses that are the largest and most respected in the world and are not associated directly with the new green economy. We focus on these companies, which are major contributors to California's $2 trillion GDP. We do this to directly refute those who say addressing climate change is not good for business and jobs. And while we have 3 such companies here, there are hundreds of others embracing sustainability, huge job creators that are household names. Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Allstate, Best Buy, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, eBay, Intuit, Toyota, Ford, Gap, Levi Strauss, the list goes on and on. So let's get this discussion going. And to do so, please welcome to the stage from UPS with over 395,000 employees and $55.4 billion in revenue, Michael Britt. From Apple, with over 50,000 jobs at Apple and supporting over 250,000 other jobs and over $170 billion in revenue, Lisa Jackson. And from CalPERS, the largest public pension fund in the US with over $300 billion in assets, their CEO, Ann Stossball. Please welcome to the stage. And while they take their seats, since today is about lessons learned, I just wanted to say that having had the privilege to serve as senior advisor during Governor Schwarzenegger's administration and been involved in the AB 32 negotiations, one of the big discussion points in passing AB 32 was who should have the authority to implement AB 32. And it was decided that the Air Resource Board should. And that's an important lesson when we're talking with other regions about take care with who you empower to implement these regulations. And I have to also say, before we start this, that there is no single person with the unique skill set more qualified to take on this challenging job than the great Mary Nichols. Okay, let's get going. Well, the name of this panel is Why Addressing Climate Change is Good for Business. So I'll start with Lisa Jackson at Apple. Lisa, why is it good for Apple's business?
Well, for lots of reasons. First, because our customers expect us to innovate and solve tough problems. You know, we make products that are beautiful, but that are also easy to use. And the engineers and technologists and designers at Apple take it as part of their mission to look at all the issues that we face and that our customers face. So for us, it's pretty fun to be able to look at climate change and all the challenges as opportunities. And probably there's no better way to answer that question than to give an example of the kind of opportunity we see, which is around the deployment of clean energy. Apple has 4 data centers. One of them's here in California, and every single one of our 4 data centers runs today on 100% clean energy. And folks say it can't be done, and one of the things we love to do, I think, is to turn can't into done.
Before I go on, Lisa, I have to ask you another question. Lisa came to Apple from being the head of the Environmental Protection Agency for the United States of America. So we all can only imagine the number of companies that were trying to get you. So other than the obvious reason, Lisa, of getting to see all the Apple products before they go to market and probably really good stock options, why did you go to Apple?
You know, it's a matter of scale. I did have the privilege of running the EPA, an agency I actually started my career at 20-some years before. And so to think about where you go after that, that honor and privilege, and sometimes a little bit of a tough job, but always, above all, an honor. I wanted to go somewhere that had scale. You know, the thing about EPA is that you can make a decision and it can have huge impact, not just in our country, but around the world when the agency is allowed to follow the science and use our incredible suite of environmental laws. But Apple's the same way. A big company is the same way. If you're thoughtful about the choices that you make, about the decisions that you make, and about the policies you pursue, as we're going to hear, it has scale. And so it's just been a really interesting and exciting transition to be able to see and exercise something I always said, and I heard the governor say again, you don't have to choose between the economy and the environment. You never do. If you find yourself doing that, you're asking the wrong questions. Challenge yourself to think beyond that.
Thanks, Lisa. Mike, UPS, you have over 100,000 vehicles in your global fleet. So other than the obvious reason why UPS wants to get the cost of your fossil fuel use down or the use of fossil fuel down on your cost, why is UPS focused on this?
Well, we understand, as being the largest logistics company in the world, that we need to be stewards to the industry as well as to the environment. Our employees are passionate. We have about 400,000 employees, very, very passionate about treating the environment properly. You did mention the economics of it. From an economic standpoint, obviously, the more fuel efficient we are, the less fuel we burn, the less it's going to cost us to serve our customers. I did want to mention on the economic side as well, California has been the model that we've taken basically globally. We've taken the ARBs, different programs through South Coast Air Quality Management Districts, the other air quality management districts, and we've taken them globally. We've talked to folks in China, Hong Kong, and of course the other 49 states here through advocates like CalSTART and other organizations we're part of that are trying to let them understand California gets it. All you have to do is just follow these simple steps, and we'll be able to deploy more and more alternative fuel vehicles. So we've been part of the alternative fuel infrastructure in California since the 80s. And we're proud to say we've been part of that, and we're proud to say we advocated throughout the world, and we're really getting traction globally on this right now.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question that deals with what a lot of us are kind of buzzing around and pretty frankly angry about that we've heard the last few days. As we know, as I even said in setting up this panel, the oil companies that make billions of dollars on selling fossil fuels have launched legal challenges, which they lost on not being included in California's cap and trade. And they're doing scare advertising to try to scare working families that the cost of gas is going to go through the roof. And it's probably no coincidence that that's made extra news the day we're having our symposium on why this is an important thing for California to lead on. So they're out there, even though we know that the oil company, I think they're calling themselves concerned drivers or something, is the coalition. But they are funding this campaign, claiming that gas prices are going through the roof. So here we have a man representing UPS with 100,000 vehicles. So why are you not concerned? Why is UPS not concerned that standing with California's leadership on climate change and addressing it isn't going to result in a problem for you, but just the opposite?
Well, from an engineering perspective, internal combustion engines do not work as well as electric propulsion engines. Now, I'm not saying battery vehicles, but I'm saying when you look at efficiencies, so we know that ICE motors are not going to be here forever and ever. They're basically a bridge. And there's going to be, we're going to be putting out 17 fuel cell vehicles in this state in the next 15, 16 months through a research and development program with the California Energy Commission. We're very proud to be part of that. And these rolling laboratories, if you will, they're not painless. You know, they are painful. You need to understand that, you know, we're going to have interruptions in service. We're going to have engineering challenges. There's going to be things that go on, but we need to go ahead and develop that so everyone else could use it.
Thanks, Mike. And, okay, largest public pension fund in the United States, $300 billion. Most people would think the only thing that as CEO you really need to care about is return on investment, period. Why are you a leader? Why is CalPERS so focused on sustainability?
Thanks, Bonnie, and thank you for inviting CalPERS. Thanks to the Institute and the Air Resources Board. We really appreciate it. A lot of times people ask what a public pension fund is doing, being involved in climate change, so I'm happy to answer that. What we do, our mission is serving the people of California, delivering retirement benefits to 1.5 million public sector workers. To do that, we have an investment portfolio of $300 billion. That's our current assets under management. We're invested in over 9,000 companies throughout the world, 47 countries. We're also in private equity, real estate, fixed income. Our goal is to earn an average annual 7.5%. Return, which is a tall order. For every dollar we pay in pensions, 66 cents of that comes from our investment earnings. So it's a huge responsibility. Sustainability really, in its broadest sense, is at the heart of what we do. Sustainability of the fund, sustainability of the companies that we invest in. We're actually, Apple is our largest holding. We have $1.2 billion invested in Apple right now. Big investment in UPS as well. Two of the core beliefs that we have at CalPERS around our investment policy are that risk is multifaceted. It's not just about traditional things like tracking error and volatility. We've got to look at big external factors like climate change. And we also believe that in long-term value creation of the companies that we hold, because we hold them for a long time. We're not in and out investors. And we believe that our companies have to effectively manage their financial capital, but also their human capital and their physical capital, including resources. So we heard today about the science. The potential impacts are huge on all the sectors that we invest in: technology, manufacturing, agriculture, energy, insurance industry, just to name a few. It's really staggering. And then we also see the opportunity side of climate change, the opportunities to invest as the world moves to a low-carbon economy, to invest in energy efficiency and new ways to distribute products and services. So given all that, what do? We deploy our capital with these things in mind. In our global equity portfolio, we've got a tilt. So we have more exposure to companies that are doing the right things and are looking forward to how they're going to position themselves in a low-carbon economy. We have a significant investment in private equity and clean tech. We were one of the early investors in the green wave in California. We asked our real estate managers to decrease their energy output. Over 5 years, they've done that. And then we're also very involved in the policy side. We worked with Ceres to get the SEC to require companies to disclose risk around climate change along with everything else they disclose. It's really important for investors to understand that risk. We're very supportive of the EPA rule to curb emissions on power plants. We are sending a letter today to Gina McCarthy in very strong support of the rule. But really the sea change won't come till we have market signals around carbon. We need that carbon pricing. It's critical so that investors can quantify risk and evaluate risk, critical so that companies, market participants have incentives to get into clean energy. So we're advocating for that. We'll be carrying that message to the UN summit in a couple of weeks.
And thanks, and I'm going to come back on Ceres because Ann also co-chairs Ceres, and I want to ask more about that and all the companies in that and why they're so focused on this. But because you bring up from a business perspective the policies you advocate, I want to go to Lisa because you both had a major policy hat and now you're at Apple. So from a business perspective, from Apple's perspective in particular and a business perspective in general, what do policymakers need to know that are going to be important for businesses to be able to move forward on this and do well and help keep expanding their business and jobs, but also address climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bonnie. I think a couple of things. Let's start with Apple. To use our products or for us to be able to supply our services like Siri or downloads in iTunes takes a lot of energy. And we're really proud of the fact that a lot of the things we do have changed the way people think about things like music or data or corresponding. But we want to make sure that change is sustainable and smart and looks to the future. So what's really important to us? Stable, reliable sources of energy at prices that are competitive, that make sense. And that's exactly what we find in the current clean energy market. So one of the things I would say is I could certainly put my old hat on and say there's a lot more stability and reliability we'd like to see in terms of policies, not going away, not coming and going, but it can be done right now. That's why we do it. We enjoy doing it. It makes us feel great. If you go on our environment site, apple.com/environment, you can get a sense of how important these issues are to us. But it's also great business for us. So that's what you need to know. It can be done right now. We can challenge ourselves and each other to do it and to deploy those right now. We have a manufacturing facility that we're in the process of building in Arizona that's going to run on 100% clean energy from manufacturing. Manufacturing can be clean as well. And so it's important not to get caught in the nose and to remember that it's really a matter of continuing to support those businesses. Prices and market indicators are great. And I'm sure a lot of businesses would echo what Ann just said.
All right, so I'm going to follow up only because of the unique role you've had on being on both sides of this, and that is when you say everyone understands the sustainable, predictable policy. Is there one or two policies you can point out that you think from the business community would be most important for policymakers to signal consistency on?
Well, I'm wearing my Apple hat. We were really proud to join Ceres in the California and the U.S. Climate Declaration, which was a pretty simple statement, but it said climate change is a challenge, but it's also an incredible opportunity for job creation, for growth, for research and investment, all the things we do so well in the United States, right? And that, as I'm a new resident of California, can't believe it took me so long to get here, but that California does so incredibly well. So yes, we have to keep investing in the research, in the technology, in those things that are going to continue to show the cost curve for all these renewables to go down. Energy efficiency, I absolutely agree that we have not nearly mined all the benefits out of energy efficiency policy as we can, and that's just smart business. Who wants to use any more energy or any more water than they absolutely have to? And when you're talking about paybacks that are pretty short, there's still opportunity there as well.
Mike, you mentioned, Lisa just talked about the importance of investing in research and innovation, and whether it's government or the private sector. UPS is doing that. You mentioned that earlier. And you're saying like it's a rolling laboratory and it's not easy and sometimes it doesn't pay off. So I'd like to, if you could address why are you doing it? What are the top areas you're looking at in your research investment? And to continue, because of the policymakers and the policy overview of today, what policies, Anne mentioned carbon pricing, what policies from UPS's perspective would be most helpful to your leadership role in addressing climate change and sustainability?
Just to start with that, we've been a member of Clean Cities for many, many years, and we're a national member of the President's Charter Committee. So we understand from a business perspective, a lot of customers, and you might know the term SmartWay out there, customers go to SmartWay to see where your SmartWay rating is at, and they want to see how clean you're going to deliver their packages. We're the only logistics company in the world that give you a carbon footprint of your package from Los Angeles to Maine. We could do that, and we could do it carbon-free. So we understand the importance from a marketing standpoint. We understand that that's a market, that product is out there is marketable. Secondly, from our perspective, from our rolling laboratory, we've been doing this for many, many years, and my office in Atlanta sits right next to the UPS archive. And I go over there from time to time, and they have electric vehicles that we were running in the 30s, and the same thing we're looking at today. How many miles did he go? How many packages did he deliver? What was the state of charge in, state of charge out? Same exact things we're looking at today. So we're looking for ways to get ahead, to make sure that we're delivering our package to our customers in the most economically responsible way, as well as environmentally responsible way. So the rolling laboratory continues on. We're going to purchase every single Class 8 in our U.S. small package operations. Every tractor will be a natural gas vehicle next year. We understand the economy of scale. When we make a statement like that, they can start to produce those vehicles a lot cheaper. As you may not know, when you buy a LNG tractor or LNG package car, they have to hand build most of that. So it has to come off of the line, so it gets built like a Rolls Royce the rest of the way. So you cannot get the economy of scale. If we were to have fuel cell vehicles, just as many F-150s that are built in the U.S., fuel cell vehicles, they would cost about 30% less than in ICE engines. So that the economy of scale is the main thing. And when we raise our hand and say, hey, we're going to do this, we hope that other folks will jump on board and it'll lower the economy of scale on the whole supply chain, all the way across. That's our intent. And we've been successful with that with the LNGs and the CNG vehicles. You're going to see us do that with fuel cells. You're going to see us do that globally with other opportunities throughout the world to basically take the California model and use that, because at the end of the day, there needs to be some type of incentive. And the HVIP program that we have in California is just a perfect model. It just is that little tip to put it over the end. But then pretty soon we're going to go back to our controllers and they're going to say, why are you not buying these more fuel-efficient vehicles? Because the total cost of ownership is much cheaper. And the only way we get there is economy of scale. And us being the leaders, we're stewards to that. We need to be the first ones out front and say, yeah, we're going to do that. So other companies, and we don't care who else jumps on. We want everyone to jump on. We don't consider that our IP. We just consider that the right thing to do. So everyone will have a lower economy of scale on all vehicles.
Thanks, Mike. Anne, economies of scale, he hopes others jump on. Let's talk about your hat as co-chair of Ceres, which is an organization of many of our largest companies and socially conscious companies in this country. What are some of the things that Ceres doing that, and first of all, why are so many of these businesses, some of which I named when I set up this panel, interested in this? And what are some of the projects Ceres doing that helps with scale, as you've heard both Lisa and Mike talk about, and other carbon assessments?
Thanks. So Ceres is, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit. It's headquartered in Boston, and it's a coalition of environmental groups and investors, and the mission is to mobilize sustainability leadership in the financial industry. So we do a lot. We have a lot of companies. They sign up to be a Ceres company, and then Ceres engages with them on a broad range of sustainability issues. There are companies that are committed to sustainability and to doing the right thing. Ceres also has an investor network on climate risk, which is has investors with trillions of dollars in assets working to deal with, address both the opportunities and the risks associated with climate. So one of the initiatives that we're working on is, we call it the Carbon Asset Risk Initiative, and it's really designed to deal with the fossil fuel industry. It's a coalition of about 70 investors from throughout the world with about $3.5 trillion in assets. And what we're doing is engaging the 45 largest fossil fuel companies in the world. The goal is to get them to start analyzing the risks, financial risks that they face from climate. Right now, research shows that the world's largest fossil fuel companies are spending $700 billion a year to identify and develop new reserves. And so the concern that we have, we call it stranded assets. And it's what's going to happen to these assets. The demand for coal in the US is declining. Oil costs are increasing in order for new oil projects to break even. A lot of companies, coal companies' stock is decreasing. So we're concerned about, as we move to the low carbon economy, which is inevitable, what's going to happen to these assets? What does that mean for the shareholders? They're going to be either low value or unusable. So what we've asked the companies to do is to do scenario planning. We want them to analyze a scenario that's business as usual, and then analyze a scenario where we get the carbon pricing, move to a low carbon economy. We've asked them to do that, disclose the information to investors, and then we've also asked them, how is your board of directors involved? Because we think that governance piece is really important. So to date, we've heard back from most of the companies. We've asked them to do this for next year's annual meetings. We've heard back from most of the companies, and it's interesting. Most of them acknowledge now that climate change is a risk. Some of them acknowledge the science, not all, not many. And then the general trend is really their view is that the movement to a low carbon economy is not likely. So we'll be curious to see whether they're willing to do the scenario analysis. We're going to continue to engage with the companies assertively. We don't expect them to change overnight, but we expect progress, and we'll continue to go at it.
I'm going to do a quick follow-up, because we have a lot of student leaders here in the student sustainability movement, and I hearken back to, because you talk about the companies that CalPERS invests in, and that you're a powerful investor, which gives you influence. And I remember thinking back when I was a young college activist, I was a Ralph Nader Raider. And one of the philosophies they did was actually buy like one share of stock in all the companies they wanted to have corporate responsibility, and go and at the shareholders meeting to push them. That was as a one share activist. With your powerful leverage, what are some of the things CalPERS is doing that others that are investors and people with investment dollars can also be doing to help influence those companies you're invested in?
By the way, I was a Raiders Nader too.
Oh, really?
So we can talk about that later. You asked about divestment. So we're a very long-term investor. We are holding our portfolio for many decades. We have to pay benefits for many decades to come. We're not an in-and-out investor. So our policy is not to divest. We really believe that by staying at the table, engaging with these companies, using our power and our clout, that we can get change. And so that's, we call that engagement. Along with that, we do shareholder resolutions on key issues, including environmental issues, asking companies, for example, to set targets around GHG emissions, do more disclosure. So engaging just on a broad range of sustainability issues. We invite not only investors to join us, but all stakeholders. Environmental justice came up. The human rights issues associated with climate are hugely important. It's important that those are at the table with us as well.
Thanks, Anne. And even though you represent some of the most respected investors and businesses on the planet, a couple of weeks ago when Mary Nichols, Terry, and I were over at Arnold's house briefing and strategizing for today's event, one of the things that Arnold said to us is, You know, sometimes, and we all know this issue can seem very overwhelming to the public at large. You hear the science and and you feel like, well, what can anyone do? We heard from Dan Kamen on his calculator for individuals. You talk about UPS is able to do that in tracking a package. Let me go to Lisa and Apple, because Apple is one of the most customer connected, knowing what people want of all ages, young and old. So what, from Apple's perspective, because I know there were a few apps that customers use that actually help them with this. So as we're coming to the end of this discussion, let's all focus and start with you, Lisa, on what individuals can do, because it all adds up and makes a difference, and how Apple, through some of the apps and such, can inspire people to helping individuals reduce their carbon footprint. Not everyone can be Ed Begley. Some need help from. So,
you know, we do. We have the App Store, and we're really proud of a lot of things about the App Store, including the fact that it's made so many entrepreneurs. It allows people to be business women and men with very little except their own ingenuity and a great idea. But it also allows for collective action and for education. So a lot of times I like to use favorite apps. People often ask me, well, what's your favorite green app? They're not favorites, but a couple I'll highlight today is Paper Karma. You'll like this one. Sometimes you might get mail that you don't actually want. All you do is you take a picture of the cover and the little barcode, and they take care of unsubscribing you. There's, as we now know, there's quite a bit of greenhouse gas associated with moving things around. I mean, obviously you never do that with UPS's packaging, but this is for mail that you might not want. Speaking of karma, there's karma carpooling, which is, it's all about the ride share, which helps you in your own area figure out ways to share rides so you can cut your carbon footprint that way. We have another popular one called Julebug, which is kind of a gamified way of learning ways individually to change things. And I know that sometimes that individual action, the reason it's hard is because it feels small. But I cannot tell you how many times as head of the EPA, someone came up to me and said, it was some little thing that someone asked me to do that made me realize how important it was, and now I'm a lifelong learner. We sort of heard that from Ed Begley Jr., right? So don't be afraid to challenge people to understand and learn that one thing, because you might not just be changing their mail habits. You might also be teaching someone the importance of being an activist in their life and then be an activist in the world.
Thanks, Lisa. Mike, UPS, also extremely connected to individual citizens throughout the state and the world. Give us some examples.
Well, sometimes our trucks do get overloaded when Apple comes out with new products. So we have to put more trucks on the road. So, however, you know, we have about 3,500 alternative fuel vehicles running around the U.S., and our employees are very, very proud to drive them. Those employees often operate them vehicles in which the environments they live and work, they live in. So there's a lot of personal pride with that. We also have a metrics as part of our scorecard for fuel efficiency improvements. And they may not just be LNG vehicles or EV vehicles. It might just be to put more packages on a trailer to cut one whole route out, to go ahead and make routes a little bit different so you're going less miles. So there are a lot of little important things that we do daily, and they're part of our business metrics as well. You know, because the cleanest miles, the miles never run, and that's what we always look at that. If we could just go ahead and don't run that mile for whether we could do it on a bicycle, a golf cart, or we could just do it with a walker, or put more on certain loads, it really does help us along the way. But I did mention our employees several times. We have 400,000 passionate employees about the environment. Well, every single new building in UPS is going to be solar panel capable. Wow. Because as you well know, that buildings that were built before solar panels were out weren't built with enough girth to hang all that, and it just costs a lot of money to go ahead and retrofit them. So we decided that every single building, whether they're going to be solar panel or not, are going to have solar panels on board. We've been running solar panels down in Palm Springs since the late 90s. And obviously, great opportunity. We're getting, the meter turns backwards, and then when we need it, it just turns forwards. It's a great economic resource for us. So again, we understand that. Many different disciplines of engineering, aerospace, ground, industrial engineering, actively pursue ways to go ahead and never drive that mile, because we understand the importance of that.
Mike's mentioning the meter turns backwards. I mean, those of you in this room probably are aware that some of that ability is a result of smart policies that have been put in place in California. And that's why in your programs, in addition to some links to some of the relevant research on the economic cost of climate change, there's also a list of some of the most significant legislation over the past decades that have actually led us to be at the forefront of environmental protection and climate change addressing. 20 seconds left. Any of you have any last words that you feel you didn't get a chance to express that you want to leave the audience with? Go, Lisa.
Yeah, never.
Our newest
never,
Californian.
Never,
Come
never.
on.
Two things occurred to me. I did want to mention that California has made it really easy for us to do things like our entire campus in Cupertino runs on 100% clean energy. We're 94% in the U.S. of all of our corporate facilities, but California's made it so easy. There's great footprint there. And the last thing I'll say, because I always have to say it, is when people talk about costs and fuel costs, ask the communities. You mentioned that we all live and work in communities. I'm a mother of 2 boys with asthma. What any parent wouldn't give or pay to try to avoid one night sitting in the hospital hoping that kid takes the next breath. I don't want to end only on the moral issue, but it's part of it, and it's the true cost of what we're doing that we all have to be aware of.
Perfect note to end on. Thank you all. As our esteemed panelists leave, it's now my pleasure to bring up the next part of our program. When I was in college, I got introduced to the philosopher Kahlil Gibran, who I loved. And one of the things he said that struck with me to this date is when he spoke on children. He said, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow. One of the lessons we wanted to share of the importance of California's leadership is our wonderful student sustainability leaders throughout the state that have been operating and making differences for decades. It's important that they be at the table. They're an important part of our leadership and our success. They push us to take a hard look at things like aligning our investment philosophy with our morals, like taking a look at things like fracking and the impacts that that could have, as well as they are the souls that dwell in the house of tomorrow, and they are the ones innovating and coming up with ideas that will create a sea change throughout our state and our planet. And with that, I'm proud to introduce the wonderful woman that runs the California Sustainability Coalition, Katie Hoffman.
Thank you, Bonnie. On behalf of the student delegates in this room and those not here today, we appreciate this opportunity to present this short film highlighting some of our efforts to advance climate justice on campuses and in communities across the state of California. Part of the film addresses the need for all of us, particularly decision makers, to make sure we do not undercut present and future generations. In this film, there is a scene that features an active fracking well in Kern County, just 20 feet from an elementary school. We were unable to include an interview with the father of a young girl who attends that school and comes home frequently with headaches and nosebleeds. This film is dedicated to that child because she represents the youth and countless others on the front lines of this extractive economy powered by fossil fuels who are inheriting a crisis that we did not create. But we are united in our dedication to adapt, and we ask that you engage with us to discuss the ideas in this film. Let's work together and realize a vision for bold climate leadership that allows us a future. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the film.
It was 2008 when I found out my mom had an aggressive form of cancer and may not live to watch me graduate from school. While at UC Berkeley, I dedicated my studies to understanding the root causes of cancer. My journey to grasp what happened to my mom led me down a path that transformed my understanding of climate change. I learned that there is a complex ecosystem of threats to our health, and the cumulative impacts of the current system based on extraction not only cause us to fall ill, but also threaten our vital life systems. Sickness has a profound effect on the home, and it takes a great deal of commitment and collaboration to remain resilient in the face of great uncertainty. I see this commitment and collaboration every day from youth across the state of California, particularly in the work that the California Student Sustainability Coalition does. We're motivated by a vision of creating a healthy world based on equity, ecology, and economy. Every day we are putting our ideas into action to transform ourselves and our institutions into models of sustainability. CSSC has a long history of advancing climate solutions through education, leadership development, and advocacy. Our convergences and leadership trainings have activated thousands of youth across the state over the past decade. CSSC leaders have organized several successful campaigns and programs, including efforts that led to the creation of the landmark UC Sustainable Practices Policy and the creation of the Green Initiative Fund, a program funded by students, which is now on 15 campuses across the state. At the UC alone, TGIF has allocated over $8 million in funding to over 700 innovative student-led projects that have advanced creative climate solutions, both on and off campus. TGIF has not only created jobs for hundreds of youth, but has also fostered the development of entrepreneurs dedicated to climate leadership.
Through TGIF funding, a group of students and I created the Student Environmental Resource Center at UC Berkeley to foster synergy between students, faculty, and administration working towards climate solutions. The center I helped create, and many more like it across the state of California, are hubs of innovation that address some of the most pressing challenges across all sectors of the economy. With the right incentives, we can lead the world in transitioning from an extractive economy based on scarcity to one that is regenerative and abundant.
Our vision for a regenerative economy promotes investment directly into creating local collaborative businesses that foster entrepreneurship and build community wealth. Recognizing the need to both educate and build enterprises that support equity, ecology, and economy, students have used programs like TGIF to grow cooperative grocery stores and other businesses across California and the nation. Thriving local economies that sustainably produce our basic food, energy, and commercial needs will ensure that our communities are adaptive to the challenges faced by climate change.
During my undergrad education, a startling fact shook my understanding about reality. Roughly a third of all global greenhouse gases come from current agricultural production. Furthermore, I learned that biodiverse organic methods of agriculture can yield as much food per square foot as conventional methods that utilize pesticides and other carcinogenic toxins. Not only this, but in situations that are not ideal, such as the current severe drought in California, biodiverse organic methods of agriculture prove to be the most resilient. This understanding has led me to a career educating our next generations in regenerative and sustainable practices.
Climate change and pollution already have a severe impact on the health of our water and land. These resources are intergenerational and fundamental to agriculture and California's economy as a whole. We need to ensure that our policies and actions today do not undercut present and future generations.
Students Against Fracking was born out of a need of addressing the root causes of current climate challenges while discovering and investing in new economic models that benefit the people and do not harm the planet. We cannot consider ourselves climate champions while also investing in and allowing destructive practices like fracking and crude by rail into our state. My California public education has taught me that hydrologic fracturing is not a climate solution. It contaminates water and air, it degrades public health, and it exacerbates climate change.
The fossil fuel divestment campaign gets at the source of catastrophic climate change by challenging our institutions to take their money out of the top fossil fuel companies and instead invest in sustainable solutions. Modern energy companies' business plans are predicated on extracting and combusting 5 times the amount of carbon that scientists say we can burn to avoid 2 degrees warming. We have the obligation to align our investments with our intentions for a habitable world.
The fossil-free movement is international, with over 500 youth campaigns.
Here in California, from the boardrooms of Pitzer College to Stanford University, we are taking leadership in addressing our investments in climate change. We are pushing for and achieving large-scale institutional change. We trust that the UC will continue to collaborate with us to stand on the right side of history, and we need California legislators and business leaders to do the same.
Social justice, economic justice, all forms of justices are integral to the divestment campaign. Because what we're saying is that if it's wrong to wreck the planet, then it's wrong to invest in companies that are profiting from that wreckage.
Students aren't only pushing for divestment from fossil fuels. They're actually talking about how do we transition from this dirty economy to an economy that's more responsible, has better energy sources, and has more sustainable and just communities.
So we need young leaders in America to be stepping up and saying, I will create that business that puts solar on every school. There's software, there's finance engineering, there's all these opportunities that need the ingenuity and genius of young millennials to be applied to.
California is home to some of the most visionary individuals and institutions in the world. We're constantly pushing boundaries and redefining what's possible. Let's use our competitive advantage to lead the world to a carbon-free economy.
The wealth of a nation and the health of a people cannot be measured in fiscal quarters or presidential terms or profits and losses or political victories. They get measured in generations, and that's why this is what's inspiring me.
Climate change matters to me because I love my home and I love my family, and climate change threatens both of those things, and I will do absolutely anything to protect them. But this isn't something that's just unique to me. We all have people, places, ideas, things that we love, and climate change threatens all of those things. So we all have a responsibility to act to protect what we love.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome R20 advisor and former California EPA Secretary, Terry Tamminen.
All right, so Arnold Schwarzenegger's not the only one who said, I'll be back. It's great to be back at Cal EPA. Some great memories here, a lot of wonderful, familiar faces, and so glad that you're all here, and those of you that are joining us on the web, thank you for being here today. I also think this was the perfect setup. Let's give those students another great big round of applause. Perfect setup for the discussion we're going to have here in a minute with three really distinguished and incredible leaders. I just want to say briefly first that when candidate Arnold Schwarzenegger decided to run for governor, he surprised a lot of people by running on an environmental platform, an environmental action plan. And I learned two very important things that are relevant to this panel discussion we're going to have now. When we worked on that campaign and that environmental action plan. The first thing was that in all of the parts of the action plan, if you look at it, there were detailed measurements of what he wanted to accomplish by a certain date for air quality, for water quality, for setting aside parks and land and resources and electric vehicles and you name it. And of course, there were many in the political sphere around him at the time that said, well, wait a minute, Arnold, you can promise to cure cancer and get global peace, but just don't put a date on it or anything, because you might be held accountable. And of course, he said, well, that's crazy. You know, I wouldn't be a bodybuilder, a champion bodybuilder, if I hadn't said by a certain date, I want to be able to lift 500 pounds and to be able to win a championship or whatever it is. You have to set goals. You have to be bold in those goals. And you have to be able to measure your progress. So the bottom line is you can't manage what you don't measure. And the second thing that emerged out of that early work that we did together was the idea that, you know, it's great to have big visionary policies, and it's great to go up on platforms like this and have all these people in dark suits and whatnot think big thoughts and talk about it. But what does this mean to the average person? Especially people who might not have the same voice as many who have the opportunity to come speak to their elected leaders or to business leaders. What does it mean to average people? And those two lessons are something that we continue to try to be guided by as we look for opportunities through the R20, which is an international NGO that works on taking these lessons, not just from California, but from all over the world, and sharing the policy lessons, the technology advancements, and then the finance to invest in actual low-carbon economic development projects,
but never forgetting that it's people that we're trying to work with. It's people who need those jobs. It's people who need to develop those businesses and have the quality of their lives improved. And that the people who have perhaps the least voice among us are the ones that have the most to say to us. So with that, I'd like to bring up our distinguished panel, and their bios are in your program, so I won't get into the details, but let me please welcome up to the stage now Kevin De Leon, who is the pro tem of the Senate, soon to be. Dr. R.K. Pachauri, the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and Bob Foster, former mayor of Long Beach. And thank you all for being here. And as Governor Schwarzenegger mentioned, Patchy, I think you get the award for coming the farthest. But let me start, Kevin, with you, a little closer to home here. First of all, there's a connection between you and Mayor Foster that I just want to highlight that actually is also relevant to this discussion today, and my wife would kill me if I didn't mention this, is your great support of the recently passed law to ban single-use plastic bags from the state of California. And the fact that, of course, Bob, as mayor of Long Beach, was at the bottom end of that funnel where all of those plastic bags washed out into his harbor, into his bay, and onto his beaches. And this is not irrelevant. I don't just mention this because I know my wife is watching. Although that doesn't hurt. But no, because obviously all of that extra plastic production and driving those heavy shipments of plastic bags all over the globe and so forth, all of that adds to greenhouse gas pollution. And it's just an example of one of the many small things that add up to the big picture that individuals do. But what I want to address first is that you've been a champion for involving our low-income communities in climate change policy for a long time, including your bill that directs some of the cap-and-trade funding to projects in these communities. And so when we talk about bottom-up, we often think that means bottom-up from, say, states and provinces and cities, as Governor Schwarzenegger mentioned, up to our national leaders and our international institutions. But bottom-up also means our communities influencing and benefiting from this change to a cleaner, more sustainable economy. Please talk about why you see that as such an important issue.
Well, thank you very much, Terry. First and foremost, good afternoon to each and every one of you. It's an honor and pleasure to be here, especially with our distinguished honorable guest. Obviously, climate change is a very serious issue, and it's an issue that's here with us to stay. And I'm dedicated and committed in every which way to help counterattack the alarming rate of carbon into our atmosphere. Now, that being said, obviously, California is the leader, not just nationally, but globally, when it comes to counterattacking the harmful effects of climate change. I think the world is watching us now, obviously with the severe dysfunction in Washington, D.C. Very good, honest intentions, but California is the place where everyone's watching right now, China, India, and elsewhere, to see what we do, obviously, with our carbon cap and trade dollars and how we price out carbon emissions. But SB 535, obviously SB 535 comes from the thesis or the philosophy that globally, but locally too, regionally in California, those individuals that'll be most impacted by both climate change and criteria pollutants, NOx, SOx, particulate matter 2.5, are those communities that are at the lower socioeconomic strata. The resiliency, adaptation, and mitigation, they don't have the financial resources, if you will, to sort of counterattack the harmful impacts of climate change on the economy, has impacts on their jobs, as well as, I guess, the co-pollutants, whether it's mobile emissions, tailpipe emissions, or cement plants, energy plants located in and around the community. So obviously with the co-pollutants, the NOx, SOx, particulate matter 2.5, I think that Secretary Jackson articulated very nicely with regards to the alarming rate increase in asthma, particularly children of color in the poorest communities throughout the state of California. The highest rate, the biggest reason for absenteeism in our public school system, K through 12 public schools in California, is due to asthma. And I have a district, for example, I represent about 1 million constituents. I have 7 major freeways that crisscross my district, and it's like a serpent that chokes the life, the oxygen out of young child's lungs. So I have the 2, the 5, the 10, the 60, the 101, the 110, as well as the 710 freeways. 7 major freeways that crisscross this district. And obviously with goods movement coming from the Pacific Rim, from China and elsewhere, when someone, for example, lives in Paducah, Kentucky, or Bloomington, Indiana, they go to Walmart to buy a pair of underwear or socks, or they go buy a flat screen television set, the young lungs of a young child, a young girl, has subsidized that lower price point once that product comes in from China through the largest port in America, which is Long Beach and Los Angeles combined. And when it goes right through the communities and through the neighborhoods to distribution points elsewhere throughout the country, when someone purchases that flat screen television set, the harmful impact on someone's lungs has been impacted, obviously, in Southern California especially. So what 535 does is, with our pricing of carbon emissions, carbon in California with the cap and trade program, what we do is we invest minimum floor 25%. 25% energy efficiency retrofits, upgrades, and so forth, dealing with urban forestry planting so we can keep our canopy, so we can sequester carbon, cooling centers, obviously, so we can mitigate the heat island effect, especially in low-income neighborhoods, because low-income neighborhoods, it's cement, it's asphalt, it's concrete, as opposed to if you live in Brentwood, Pacific Palisades, Hillsborough, elsewhere, you have green because you have the financial wherewithal to purchase green and get next to green. So it's the first of its kind in the nation. I think it's the first of its kind in the world, because these communities that will be disproportionately impacted by both climate change are going to have to be part of the solution as well, too.
Very well said. And 2 quick statistics that relate directly to what you said. 40% of all the goods imported into the United States come through that LA Long Beach hub. And secondly, USC did some research a couple of years ago that showed that a child who lives within a mile of one of those busy freeways you mentioned loses 1% of their lung function every single year. So Bob, let's turn to you.
I've already lost most of my lung function.
As the mayor of Long Beach, you actually were able to do something with these kinds of funds that are coming from the state, from cap and trade, but even before that, funds that were raised to deal with this problem, and you had a remarkable track record of success. When people say you can't tackle problems this big, I think you demonstrated that they were entirely wrong.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. That's true. Shortly after I became mayor, which is now 8 years ago, and out of office for about 2 months, we decided that the port, all the statistics you've heard about the port and about its impact on the surrounding communities, is true. Its economic impact is true, and its environmental impact is true. So we set about saying we're going to change this. So we did it through a variety. We developed a Clean Air Action Plan. We had a plan for vessels, a plan for trucks, a plan for equipment on the harbor, and everyone said, people are going to go elsewhere, you're going to ruin the goods moving industry, you're going to ruin the economy in California, and we didn't believe that. And what we wound up doing is instituting a vessel speed reduction program, eventually moving the vessels with an incentive from bunker fuel to distillate fuel, a remarkable reduction in pollution. We developed a Clean Trucks program that every couple of years notched up the model truck you had to have to come in the port. We started with 94 trucks, and today you have to have a 2007 or newer truck to enter the port. I won't go through all the things we did, but ultimately what we did in the 3 years ahead of time is the reduction of pollutants in the port on criteria pollutants is now down in excess of 80% from when we started.
Wow.
And so we did that well ahead of time. We did it actually with the help of the industry. I mean, the trucking industry stepped up to the plate and saw the economic advantage of buying new trucks earlier instead of paying fees in the interim. And we thought we were going to have to do this with public funds. We wound up doing it almost entirely with private sector funds. So it really has been a cooperative effort. So, and we haven't destroyed the economy. We have actually now, even after the downturn, movement through the port now is up in excess of 2007 levels. And we think we've demonstrated to the world what you have to do as a port. There's more to be done, but what you have to do as a port. You have a responsibility to the communities you serve, and you have a responsibility to future generations. You just heard that earlier, and I think we've executed that. And in addition, we banned plastic bags 3 years ago. I just want you to know.
Well, in fact, I'm sure that's part of what helped to influence our state legislature, which I know we were trying to get that law passed all the way back into the Schwarzenegger administration. But every one of those little things does add up. I think that's part of it. And Patchy, you have been, and you'll forgive me for being informal and calling you Patchy, Dr. Pachauri, by the way, always is credited with having won the Nobel Prize, and I'll correct that because I know he cringes when he hears that he accepted it on behalf of the IPCC for all of the wonderful scientists that contributed, and he is very humble, but they would not have accomplished that without him. So in many ways, we like to say he won the prize. But in any event, it really was a great effort, Professor Kamen and everyone else that was involved in that. So you see these problems and these solutions obviously from the very big picture level, but your work in India and around the world has the Light a Billion Lives program, which you may want to touch on, and so many of the other things that you see happening for ordinary people. What are the lessons either from California or that we could bring to California from ordinary people, how they are having to address climate change in their lives, and whether it's giving up a wasteful plastic bag or whether it's something even more profound? What are the lessons you're seeing?
Thank you very much, Terry, but let me at the outset salute the leadership of California. It's always inspiring to come here. Governor Schwarzenegger, Governor Jerry Brown. I mean, you've really established a track record which is a model for the rest of the world. Now, when it comes to grassroots actions, I was very moved by the film that I saw of the students. You know, that's really the kind of action you need. I come from a country where a person, brown-skinned, wearing just a loincloth, was able to mobilize entire population of India in rising against colonial rule. And he succeeded without any arms, without any money, without any form of violence whatsoever. I think what we really need to do today is to spread the message of science. Now, you referred to the IPCC. I'm privileged and proud to have been the chairman since 2002. Now, the fifth assessment report, which we're on the verge of completing, has involved literally thousands of scientists. But that knowledge, which is a fund of new information, new findings of what science really represents, has to reach the people. And I think if we were able to do that, whether it's through the government, through universities, through institutions, or by mobilizing students in schools, people will find answers to this problem. What we need to do is to adapt to the impacts of climate change. We've heard earlier talks where clearly some of the impacts on California were highlighted very appropriately. And what are we going to do? We have to adapt, because even if we were to bring down emissions to zero today, there's a certain inertia in the system as a result of which climate change will continue for several decades. This means a whole range of things. You would need to make sure that zoning restrictions are applied appropriately, where you require, let's say, changes in agriculture, because agriculture is going to be impacted, is being impacted seriously by the effects of climate change. Human health, as we've heard. All of this will require a series of measures by which we adapt to the impacts of climate change. But adaptation alone will not be enough, because we know that in a very short period of time, and we are not going to be able to predict exactly when, we would reach thresholds, we would reach tipping points beyond which adaptation, I mean, if your lungs are going to be affected, what are you going to adapt to? I think basically what we really need to do is to bring about a global movement by which we reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. And that involves everything. You referred to what my institute is doing in India. There are 1.3 billion people on this planet who have no access to electricity. Can you imagine? This is well over a century after the first incandescent lamp was invented by Edison. And these are people who have never had a lamp in their homes. How do you bring clean, efficient, durable lighting to their homes? What we've done is we train a woman in a village to set up a solar panel on the roof, and we've designed solar lanterns which are lightweight, very efficient, using LED. These lanterns are charged during the daytime, and she rents them out to the entire village at night. And the result is that those people who were sitting around kerosene lanterns, which are a fire hazard, which emit emissions that are extremely harmful to the health of people sitting around, and these are mainly women and children, all that gets eliminated. So my submission is, we've got to start thinking out of the box. When are we going to do that? Only when we realize the seriousness of the problem and the excitement of the challenge that lies ahead. And I think if we can do that, whether it's government, whether it's business and industry, schools, colleges, I often address school kids and they ask me this question, what can I do? I tell them, well, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that, excuse me, when you're at home and you move from one room to the other, please make sure you switch off the light. Change your bulbs to represent the most efficient technology, because you save money by doing that. Yes, there might be a slightly higher price up front, but look at the savings in terms of energy that you're not going to consume. I said, when it comes to transportation, don't jump into a car just because you want to go and excuse me. Just because you want to go and buy something from a 7-Eleven store. If you can walk, do that. If you can bicycle, of course, you've got to create cities where using a bicycle is not hazardous and that it's facilitated through dedicated lanes and so on. And most importantly, I think kids can also shame adults into doing the right thing. So I'll just stop with an anecdote that I often relate. When I'm in Delhi, and that's very rare, I normally go for a swim in the morning. And there was a guy who would also swim at the same time, but he took about half an hour in the shower and he kept singing. So both were rather offensive, the fact that he's wasting so much water. And he thinks he's singing and I'm having to listen to part of it. But one fine day I found that he stopped his half-hour shower. He did it in 5 or 6 minutes. I said, what happened? He said, my son told me that the ideal time for a shower is 7 minutes and that I'm not to waste a single drop beyond that period.
Very good.
So the moral of my song is that we need to spread information. We need to educate people, and we'll all find ways by which we deal with this problem.
Perfect, and that we're all empowered to sing shorter songs. Kevin, let me come back to you. And by the way, I'm hoping that you guys will all kind of challenge each other and feel free to follow up on anything that any one of you has said. And let's make this a discussion, not just in the few minutes we have left, kind of a question and answer with me. Feel free to jump in on any of this. But Kevin, let me turn now, when we talk about bottom up, of course, there's people, there's government, we've talked about business. What about investors? If money doesn't move into these sectors to develop better LED lights or solar lanterns or whatever it might be, let alone alternative technologies, we won't see these things scale up and the price come down. We heard from UPS earlier, for example, that fuel cell vehicles could actually be a third less costly than internal combustion engines, but only with mass production. So I know that you've been advocating the importance of raising private investment capital to support projects in California, and especially for lower income communities. So as the pro tem elect of the Senate, what sorts of policies do you see that the legislature could enact or government could enact to attract more private capital into these sectors?
One thing I believe strongly, Terry, is that you can have a cleaner environment and a better economy, that they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are compatible with each other. So it's not a zero-sum game. Either A, you counterattack climate change, you reduce the amount of carbon, and the economy suffers, or the economy continues to grow at a rapid pace or at some certain pace, but what's going to be impacted adversely is going to be our environment, the atmosphere, as well as the quality of our air. I don't believe they're mutually exclusive, and I think that what Bob has proven down in Long Beach is a test point, an example. I think what we're going to accomplish with the single-use plastic bag ban bill is going to be a perfect example in California, because we're going to be able to create jobs because of some other innovative stuff that's part of that legislation here in California. So creating job growth is very critical in California. I do believe ultimately that there's not enough public dollars for investments to reach a low carbon economy and to actually hit our AB 32 goals. There's tens of billions of dollars of money in the private sector, and I think we're going to have to figure out how we attract that capital and we can deploy that capital so we can in fact underwrite these really important goals that we have with regards to low carbon economy, and whether that's creating a green bank in California or working with Governor Jerry Brown and with his point person, Bob Rossi, in investing in their infrastructure bank. I think one important critical piece is how do we de-risk, if you will, for the private sector to make some of the more risky investments in California so we can invest in our renewable portfolio, so we can invest in energy efficiency as well as a smarter grid, advanced transportation, energy storage. If in fact we're going to move towards a low carbon economy, it's very clear to me that public dollars, whether you're the governor, whether you're the pro tem, whether you're the speaker of the assembly, it simply is not enough. There's tens of billions of dollars on the sidelines right now that are ready to get in the game, but they need some certainty, they need clarity, they need, I think if someone had mentioned, I think it was Ann had mentioned, the signals, the market is waiting for certain signals from us as policymakers. It's absolutely critical, so therefore, work with Governor Brown and his administration and Bob Rossi, whether we move it through statutorily, through legislation, or work in a collaborative fashion with the governor to help better develop the infrastructure bank so we can provide the capital that's necessary to move forward with these types of loans that are absolutely critical in the private sector. I want to add one thing too, just really quickly, because this is a very historic event with our Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and our Governor Jerry Brown. I want to give a special recognition to Assembly Speaker Emeritus Fabian Nunez. And the reason why I want to give him the recognition is that many of us would not be in this room here today because globally, obviously, a lot of the scientists were somewhat demoralized given the fact that in Washington, D.C., with the Kyoto protocols and everywhere else, folks were simply not getting their act together. But it was a catalyst here in California, and quite frankly, working with then Assemblywoman, or I believe Senator Fran Pavley, but it was the muscle, it was the political muscle, non-scientifically acquitted in such a manner that actually moved this measure, working in collaboration with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I want to give a special recognition to our Speaker Emeritus here, Fabian Nunez. Here. It was that political muscle that made this come to fruition at the end of the day, and we wouldn't be here having this discussion on how we price out carbon, whether we invest, how do we invest and attract the capital and deploy that capital. But bringing the private sector dollars in is absolutely critical because there simply is not enough public dollars given the fact that we have K through 12 challenges, higher education, Cal State's community colleges, University of California, how we deal with our infrastructure. We have to bring that capital in, and it's there and it's ready.
So, Senator, you obviously have had a great teacher, and we'll look for that same sort of leadership in the Senate from you, which I know you've already provided throughout your career.
Yeah, Tara, let me
Jump in.
comment. I think there's a way, there's an example actually right now that kind of hits this point about private capital, personal actions, and the public in general. And I think if you look at the sweep of history in most industries, and you could look at entertainment, you could look at communications, you could look at transportation, it has gone from central systems to decentral systems, and that's really what we're all about here. What we're trying to do is reduce our carbon footprint, but we're also decentralizing, atomizing the energy sector in many ways, where ultimately 20, 30, 40 years from now, you'll have self-sufficient homes and businesses that will be somewhat, actually probably decoupled from the grid. Now, how do you get there? Dan Cameron earlier said that energy efficiency is critical. I started my career in energy efficiency. I'm an energy efficiency maniac. I started Title 24. It is the foundation of this. So how do you marry the internet and people and link that up with finances? And just to give you an example, we are now at the stage where the system is moving so rapidly because of the introduction of renewables, particularly solar, that you no longer have the traditional peaks in the energy system we used to have. It's going to be a dynamic system, and what that's going to require is to be able to aggregate a whole bunch of people that can control their energy use in their businesses and their homes, and on a signal can change that pattern to either use more or use less. And what we're going to have to do is take things like this from California, these kind of inventions, where in your pocket you can know what's going on in your home in terms of energy use. That function is available today. What's necessary is to marry the financial rewards with that, to give private business the ability to make money from that, to go out and aggregate those customers, give people the power in their own hands to change their use. The systems are all there, the techniques are all there today, and now have someone aggregate all those customers so you can either use less electricity or more electricity when it's beneficial for the system. What's necessary to do that are pricing signals. And we don't do that in California. For all our advanced techniques and all our technology, we don't do that. There's a lot of fear out there that what the impact's going to be. We need a dynamic pricing structure to be able to marry the modern technological world with individual initiatives that we've all heard and desires to be able to be much more efficient and to use other resources. And that is something that would really change the dynamics here, would change the shape of things. It would make a lot of things we're talking about in terms of the new energy economy possible. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to see in terms of change of state policy.
Yeah, let me say something in that context, Terry. I think all that's been put forward is extremely important, because let me emphasize once again, California is being watched by the rest of the world. Professor Ramanathan is here from the University of California at San Diego. We are working together with Mary Nichols in seeing how the California experience in improving air quality can go to India. And I think in that regard, the R20 is an excellent institutional mechanism that you've come up with. So I think what's going to happen with some of these issues that have been highlighted, whether it's through pricing, through regulation, and I think Governor Schwarzenegger, once again, may I say, needs to be saluted for what you did to bring about this radical change in improvement of efficiency of automobiles and reducing the emissions from the tailpipes of automobiles. I'll just end by saying something. Dr. Toyoda, the chairman emeritus of Toyota Motor Company, is a good friend of mine. He's almost 90 years old, but you know, his mind is as sharp as ever. And he was saying that he would like to have the largest fleet of cars being sold in India. I said, heaven forbid. I said, if you're going to sell cars to India, please make sure that they're fuel cell cars. And he said, I'm an internal combustion man, and therefore I'm fascinated by the IC engine. I said, okay, well, if you produce IC engines, make sure that there's carbon capture and storage arrangement in them. And he says, I'll study that. So the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, even if we have to bring about a transition from our current infrastructure to something that is really going to solve the problem of climate change, then clearly we'll have to think of the pathway by which we get from here to there. And one fact that I want to mention, which we brought out in our 5th assessment report, if we want to keep temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, we have to get into a zero emission or a negative emission mode by the end of the century. And that means by 2050, we'll have to treble or quadruple low carbon and zero carbon energy supply coming from renewables. And I think this is the challenge that California has. And I think if California sets this blazing trail, then I think the rest of the world has something to follow. And I'd like to appeal to the leadership of California, the people of California, the businesses, and of course civil society and academia, to see that the remarkable record that you have can be accelerated, can be built on, so that all of us in the rest of the world get a sense of confidence and a great deal of inspiration by which we can really tackle this most important challenge that human society is facing.
Thank you for that. That deserves a round of applause. Let me shift it a little bit, and I'm going to ask each of you the same question, which is sort of in two parts. First of all, it's are you an optimist or a pessimist? Because what Patchy just laid out, what we heard from the science today, shows that we've got we already have impacts that we're suffering, and they are about to get worse before they get better, no matter what we do. So the longer-term solution, the bigger-term solution, whether it's for these communities that are disproportionately impacted, whether it's for coastal sea level rise, and whatever it might be, are you optimistic or pessimistic? And then secondly, tell us one inspirational thing that you've seen, whether it's in public policy, whether it's a small business, whether it's somebody doing something, again, this bottom-up approach that all of us could learn from that makes you either optimistic or maybe it's something that makes you pessimistic, like your comment about Dr. Toyota and being concerned that he'll still make internal combustion engines. So Kevin, let me start with you, if I may. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? And then can you give us one thing that has inspired you, hopefully to be the optimist?
I'm very optimistic. The great work that Fabian Nunez, Fran Pavley, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mary Nichols, Linda Adams, all these folks. Very optimistic still. We're going to invest $2.5 billion in the next few years in energy efficiency. This is outside the parameters, the framework of AB 32, but with energy efficiency. I agree with Bob in how we reduce our energy load. It's innovative because what we do, reduce energy load, you capture that savings, you reinvest it back in the classroom, and you create jobs because the jobs are not outsourceable or you can't offshore them. So I am quite optimistic. Two is that with SB 1275, knock on wood, if the governor signs it, Governor Jerry Brown, we're going to put low-income folks into ZEV, zero emissions vehicles. They're going to bundle their rebates at the state as well as federal level, and hopefully they can contribute to the low carbon economy and also reduce their greenhouse gas impact, because folks who live in poor communities and low income communities, because of their realities, they have to work and they have to move from point A to point B. They tend to drive cars that are older models, that are bigger gas guzzlers, therefore disproportionately impacting climate change because they're a higher amount of emissions. Lastly, I am still very optimistic because, quite interestingly, an individual who I met, who I worked with on Prop 39 was George Schultz, obviously, and Tom Steyer. Tom Steyer is very interesting because he's become somewhat a little controversial as of late because of his money in the political arena as it deals with climate change. But he's changed the dynamic and the paradigm because he's become the sharp tip of the spear, if you will. And because of that, there's someone with the financial resources to counter the Koch brothers and other individuals who are, at this point, I don't know if they're naysayers altogether with regards to climate change, or it's just the bottom line. They know climate change exists, they've seen the empirical data, they know the science is there, but they don't care. Regardless, it's not an ideological or religious issue per se. With them, it's just about money, and they don't want to lose money at the peril of future generations to come. So I am very highly optimistic that we can counter-arrest this.
That's great. And Senator, what was that bill again you're hoping the governor will sign? I didn't catch that. I just wanted to jot that down.
1275, 1 million electrical vehicles for all Californians.
Ah, very good. Okay.
That's McFadden's right there.
For those who want to send their cards and letters. Very good. Okay, Patchy, optimist or pessimist? And we've only got a couple of minutes, so your final thought,
well,
optimist or pessimist?
I'm an incurable optimist, and I see lots of reasons why you get a sense of confidence from what is being done around the world in several places. Not enough, not fast enough, but I think we're on the verge of some major changes. I'll just give you one example of many that exist in different parts of the world. Our current Prime Minister, when he was Chief Minister of the state of Gujarat, decided to cover all the canals, the irrigation canals over there, with photovoltaic panels. The huge benefit from that is the fact that you don't have to acquire land, and you just use government property for covering with photovoltaic panels.
And reduces evaporation.
It cuts down evaporation. It also improves the efficiency of the panels because, the temperature is lower. And what's more, people living by the canals can get electricity easily. And there's a whole host of benefits. So the point I'd like to make is that once people realize the co-benefits from some of these actions, you realize that quite apart from not having to incur any cost, you actually can get a major gain. So you're dealing with negative costs. And that's where I go back again, that we really need to disseminate information on the problem, the nature of the problem, the cost of inaction, and the huge benefits of action that needs to be taken.
The huge opportunity. So Bob, you got the last word, optimist or pessimist, and something that's inspired you lately.
I'm very optimistic, and I think all you have to do is look at the progress we've made, not only in California, but in the country, on all of the things we're talking about. You heard someone mention that we have twice the population and 4 times the amount of cars in the air in California is much better. I remember in the 70s when you didn't even want to go outside, it was so bad in Southern California. So I am very optimistic about the future. In terms of inspiring things, there's a lot of examples, but I remember years ago, I try to practice good practices. I've driven an electric car for 13 years, and I was describing this to somebody in a radio interview, and I said, you know, I take Navy showers because I want to really save water. And this person got this bewildered look on their face, and I said, no, it doesn't mean that I invite a bunch of buddies over and we shower together. Not a bad idea, maybe, but anyway, I said what it means is, you know, you basically get wet, turn the water off, and you episodically go on and off and rinse off, so you really do save an enormous amount of water, and I do that everywhere I go, no matter where I am. It's a habit now. And I must have gotten, within about a space of 30 days, I must have gotten at least 15 or 20 letters or phone calls saying, you know, I never thought of that, but you know, I've done it, and you're right. It makes no difference, and I'm going to do that from now on. So I mean, it really, people do learn by example, and when they think about it, it makes a huge difference in water consumption.
Well, the image of a Navy shower for you, Bob, is something that we should close on, and I'll make it unanimous then, the panelists up here. I'm also an optimist, but I'm an optimist because of great leaders like our 3 panelists. So please give them a great big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Chair of the Air Resources Board, Mary Nichols.
By now you've probably figured out the code, which is if Mary Nichols is coming back to the stage, there's another governor right behind her. And that's exactly what's about to happen. It's my very great privilege and honor now to introduce my current boss, a man who has been a leader on global environmental issues for longer than many of people may realize, back to his very first days as governor of California in the mid-1970s when he was lecturing then young whippersnappers at the Air Resources Board, including myself, about how we needed to take into account the impacts of what we were going to be doing at that point, which was thinking about forcing the global auto industry to put catalytic converters on their cars, the impact that was going to have outside the United States and not just at home. As you've heard throughout this conference, California occupies a unique position in the world in being a huge global economy with impacts everywhere as a consumer and as a producer of all kinds of product and content, and yet also as a place that faces at home every challenge that you can think of in terms of disparity of income, wealth, and poverty, needs that are vast on a social scale. How we manage to bring about economic and social justice and continue to play our leadership role with the planet is the task that uniquely falls to the governor. This governor has had on his watch the responsibility for implementing much of what's in AB 32, including the cap and trade program. And as you've heard alluded to by many of the other speakers, nothing that we do here is without controversy. So I think it's a wonderful way to wrap up this panel to introduce to you now the governor of the state of California, Jerry Brown.
To get all these reporters to talk about climate change, Governor Schwarzenegger, you have probably made this happen. Because I've been trying for several years to get more than 2 cameras to come to a meeting about climate change. And then even more challenging is to get them to report about climate change and not some item of the day, which seems to be more newsy. All right. This is, I think, emblematic of the challenge we face and how we get it done. So I just want to review and just sketch out how we got here. And how we got here started with an actor and a Republican who became governor. And I'm talking about Ronald Reagan. See, I like to go back at least 40 years. That's when I started. And I followed two Republican actors, and they both were very interested in the environment. Now, a lot of you don't know, but Ronald Reagan was governor and Richard Nixon was president. This was 1969, and California was given a specific authority to obtain a waiver to have much more stringent vehicle emission standards. And that was only given to California, although other states could follow our lead. And that became the precedent for California to actually pioneer air pollution strategies to improve our health and then more recently our whole environment. And so that was really the point where I identify how come California is so different from so many of the other states. And it started back under the Clean Air Act when California was given this specific prerogative to chart its own course. And by the way, all the things they're saying about AB 32 was said about the vehicle emission standards. In fact, I recall Henry Ford himself coming out to complain. We were cranking down the NOx emission standards. And Mary was there, and Tom Quinn, and Henry Ford himself came. But after a while, he went away relatively happy. We didn't hear from him again. So we got that. But it's very similar. So first we get Reagan. Then we get Gray Davis, and we get the Pavley emission standards. And then we get Governor Schwarzenegger, and we get AB 32. And I'm not sure we could have gotten AB 32 if we had a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor. I think we needed a Democratic legislature and a very independent-minded Republican governor. That's how it happened. So that's, of course, a lot of these things are like the California Environmental Quality Act and a bunch of other things that we have in California that were signed under Reagan. Then the next guy who comes along, you got to make it work. And so that's kind of what I'm doing with AB 32, actually. But make no mistake about it, to get AB 32 through the California legislature, that is heavy lifting. And I don't think anyone should ever underestimate that. I'm not sure any other governor might have done this. And sometimes I have to say, not only do you need big dreams, but you can't know everything about the legislature or you wouldn't even try. So and that's why we need some fresh eyes on the prize. Not right now. We don't need any fresh eyes right now. But we will. Eventually, you're going to need some fresh thinking in Sacramento. So anyway, we do have something. California is the world leader in climate change because of Governor Schwarzenegger and AB 32, and before that, to the special legal prerogatives given to the state. And there's another element that I think has put California in the forefront. From the time of John Muir, there's been a sensitivity to the environment in California, maybe because of our wonderful Sierras, maybe because of Lake Tahoe, maybe we're joining the Pacific Ocean. There is a sensitivity, and therefore there's an openness for these kind of environmental initiatives. So it is a bipartisan. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's a human challenge. And we're getting things done because we're rising. Everything that someone said, I think it was Teilhard de Chardin, that said, whatever rises converges. And if we lift our minds and hearts and our imagination, we will converge around a sense of what's good for all of us, what's good for humanity, what's good for the future generations. And that's what the climate change challenge is. It's not the immediate, it's not the news bite, it's not going to lead the 6 o'clock news, but it is really profound in its importance. And how we respond will be a measure of democratic governance. Can it really work? And I think it can. I think it is in California. We are attacking carbon pollution. And we know from the ruling of the EPA and the Supreme Court, carbon is a pollutant. It's a pollutant because it's a greenhouse gas, and that endangers all of humanity. And when we reduce our carbon pollution, we improve the health of our lungs, we reduce respiratory assaults that carbon makes on us, and the same with asthma, and it has real practical, even agricultural productivity. All that is degraded by the promiscuous and uncontrolled production and emission of various forms of carbon. And that's why the carbon industry, those who produce, extract, and produce and deliver carbon in its various forms, the coal industry, the oil industry, and the natural gas industry have an obligation, a human obligation, to deal with the consequences of their own success. And I was speaking to an oil industry executive, and he said, this isn't a problem, this is the basis of our prosperity. And if you look at the history of economic growth, you'll see that since the industrial age, there's been a spike in economic output and prosperity. It's unprecedented in all of human history. So yes, fossil fuels have been at the heart of the rise, the incredible rise of modern prosperity. But there is now, we now see a dark shadow. And what works and produces one result can also work to produce quite another result. And so the dark shadow of the prosperity of the carbon economy is climate change, extreme weather events, the rising of sea level, the forest fires of California, the droughts that cause hunger and famine and mass migrations. This is the dark shadow that we have to understand. And now we have to find a way to continue and deepen the prosperity even as we correct for the negative impacts of carbon pollution. We have to make changes. And those changes are not made in government halls. We don't make batteries at the EPA or the state of California. That's done by inventors and technologists and derived from investment capital. And luckily, California gets 50% of the venture capital that is made available in America. So we have to look to our entrepreneurs and our scientists and our researchers to develop the technology. But in order to make the technology, we have to have the incentives. And that's what we're doing here in California with our cap and trade system, with our 1/3 goal of renewable energy, or with our building standards, and with our appliance efficiency standards, with our upgrading of the grid to make it sophisticated, with our energy imbalance markets. We have an integrated plan to reduce carbon pollution while at the same time continuing our prosperous path forward. And as we change technology, we're going to have to change some of our understanding of what the good life requires. So it's not only a matter of different machines, it's also a matter of different values. And the two have to be molded together as we go forward, and that makes it difficult. So it's a technology challenge, it's a value challenge, it's a local challenge, and it's a global challenge. So if we do everything right, that's not enough if we only do it in California. In fact, one oil company executive said, whatever you do in California it makes no difference. And that's not true. What we do in California affects what they do elsewhere. California is a pioneer. The automobile emission standards that the United States now enforces were started in California. So It's true that if no one follows, it's not enough. But if we continue to pioneer and to prove that we can succeed economically as well as environmentally, other people will be able to follow. And in fact, California is growing faster than the rest of the country in technology business, in manufacturing, in economic advance, as well as jobs. If you don't believe me, read Bloomberg News today. They've laid it all out there. So go to the internet. They said it. Anyway, so there it is, and I want to thank all of you for coming and being a part of this, because it is very hard to think about climate change, much less to take the concrete efforts and make the investments needed. But California is the Golden State. We're the land of dreams, and we're going to continue making this dream of a sustainable planet work locally and spreading globally. What happens here doesn't stay here. It goes all around the country and all around the world. Thank you very much.
Well, you've given us your morning, and it's been a very rich program, I think. I want to thank everybody who's been here. Before we break, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to say that we are deeply grateful to the sponsors of this event, and it's not done yet because thanks to the California Endowment and to the Athenians of USC, we've provided lunch for you. So please stick around, get a bite, and continue the conversation among yourselves and with all the great minds that are collected here in this room. Secondly, I think it's pretty obvious from all of this discussion that California did not get to where it is today without leaders of vision and courage. And so before we all break up, I want to call back up to the stage Governor Schwarzenegger, and I want to thank you and thank Governor Brown in person for your amazing leadership, both of you. Thank you so much.
The question is not, what are the needs of the Republicans or the Democrats? The real question is, what are the needs of our people? And if you just stick to one party's proposals, you miss half of the good ideas.